Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto massive chakra in chunin exams. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by vaguely defined entity and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. The big problem. Academy. Fail. Of course he had. He'd already done so more than once before. A certain downtrodden but otherwise familiar-looking blonde left the testing room, leaving behind the scarred instructor. He was simply unable to perform a jutsu. Any jutsu or at least any that used chakra. He could focus on trying to form the chakra to make the techniques, but whenever he tried, it just didn't work. Like the chakra was unstable, somehow. Last year, he had a sort of friend in a similar situation, but he had since left the academy, presumably having given up. Now he was the only one with a dubious distinction, watching his more successful classmates finishing their practical ninjutsu exams, from the stuck-up but actually effective Sasuke to the obsessive but smart Sakura to the less active than the bed he sleeps on but also really smart Shikamaru. He envied them, but he wasn't done. The blonde boy Konoha knew as Naruto Uzumaki wasn't going to quit now. His pride just wouldn't let him. Even if it seemed like everyone else was destined to be a better ninja, that pride wouldn't let him give up. No, he was certain he would be more than he was, more than they were. More than they could be. Outside. It wasn't much later in the day. One of the instructors, a silver-haired chunin by the name of Mizuki, had found the blonde outside, furiously running through hand signs while trying to mold his strangely disrupted chakra. You know, it's not strictly a requirement that you be able to perform jutsu to become a ninja, the silver-haired instructor mentioned, gaining the blonde boy's attention immediately. It's not? He asked, his hopes rising. You remember Lee from last year? He couldn't use ninjutsu or jinjutsu either, and he'll never be able to, Mizuki explained. He graduated and became a genin last year, the instructor finished with a reassuring smile. He did. He became a ninja. He did indeed remember Lee, or Rock Lee. As the other person in class that was unable to use jutsu, he was quite memorable. Even if not for that quasi-kinship, his semi-friend's impressive eyebrows would have made him hard to forget. But reminiscing on his fellow jutsu-less former classmate, the genin hopeful focused on the implications. How? How did he graduate? How can I graduate without jutsu? Rock Lee sufficiently impressed Jounin might Guy. Guy then took him under his wing and made him his apprentice. This was something new to the red-orange-clad genin hopeful. It was his chance to become a ninja directly, without worrying about the exam. Wait, did that mean he could have skipped that tedious written section, too? Well, he'd already done it, so no sense crying about it. Also, there were ninjas with wings. Sometimes idioms were lost on the blonde boy. In fact, I know of a jounin who you could impress into becoming your sensei with a certain task, Mizuki stated. That was it. Whatever the instructor said from here on would be essentially taken as truth by the blonde, ignoring any other oddities, such as why Iruka sensei had never mentioned this possibility and his vague gut feelings about the silver-haired man. He was too desperate to trust vague feelings now. Who? How? The jounin wishes to remain anonymous for now until the task is completed, the instructor said, slightly calming the energetic youth. As to the task itself. In the Hokage's tower. At night, the blonde crept through the Hokage's tower-like residence carefully, seeking out the scroll of seals, an extraordinarily large scroll he had seen there before. Successfully taking it would be proof to his mysterious would-be jounin sensei that he could be a successful ninja. Though he wasn't normally one to get really worked up all the time, the sheer excitement he felt at the prospect would have him jumping up and down, if not for the fact that he was currently trying to be stealthy. He took pride in his ability to be stealthy, and he didn't want to mess up the ninja skills he was good at when trying to make up for those he lacked. He also wondered if maybe being stealthy and still while excessively excited was specifically part of the test. The Hokage, to the blonde's fortune, seemed to be out at the moment. He'd been managed to avoid the few live-in workers there as he sought out the room where the scroll he sought was kept. Soon enough, he had the rather absurdly sized roll of paper. Seriously, would it have killed the Hokage's past or present to start the Scroll of Seals, Volume 2? And was making his way out with it. As far as he could tell, he was completely undetected. Outskirts of Konoha. On the outskirts of Konoha, a blonde boy sat in the moonlight with a sizable scroll of seals partially unfurled, waiting near some hideout for Mizuki and the yet unnamed jounin. The blonde studied the various writings of the scroll, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, there would be a jutsu he could actually use. The first one, which sounded like a fun jutsu to instantly make a personal army, sadly did not work for the boy. Several others didn't seem like jutsu he'd want to use even if he was capable of it. He wasn't that interested in human sacrifice of either himself or someone nearby, which cut out the potential list considerably. Even so, he supposed he wouldn't have been able to learn these more complex jutsu either, given his failure to use relatively simple jutsu up to then. Soon enough, his musings were interrupted, hopefully by his examiners. "Naruto!" shouted an irate academy instructor. Iruka, the blonde recognized. He was most definitely not Mizuki nor, as far as the blonde boy knew, a jounin. Maybe he'd been promoted. Or maybe he'd been taken Mizuki's place as his jounin's go-between. "Oh, hello, Iruka-sensei," replied the indicated blonde, turning to his favorite instructor, though Mizuki had been making headway recently with this newest opportunity. "I managed to get the scroll." Then the would-be ninja began to notice his sensei's tone of voice and general body language. They certainly weren't congratulatory. Indeed, few would attribute them to a proud sensei. His own face began to betray a hint of fear and confusion, and his good mood began to dip a bit. Outskirts of Konoha. "What are you doing?" the chunin yelled. He was hoping Mizuki had been wrong when he was informed of his blonde student's thievery, but the instructor saw him sitting the dangerous scroll now. "You've stolen an incredibly dangerous item, and now the entire town is up in alarm looking for you." "What?" "I was just doing what Mizuki-sensei said," responded Naruto, his voice with the same hint of fear and confusion of his face. "What Mizuki said?" The chunin's face began to show confusion as well. "He said that if I could sneak into the Hokage's tower, take this big scroll, and escape to here with it, I'd get to learn to be a ninja from a jounin." Iruka was trying to get through the implications of this. Iruka had, in fact, been informed earlier by Mizuki that Naruto had stolen the scroll. Now the blonde was seemingly trying to lie to him. Iruka hadn't known the blonde boy to be particularly deceptive in the years he'd known him, but the alternative was that Mizuki had lied to him. Had Mizuki used Naruto to steal the scroll? Was his childhood friend and co-instructor of many years was a traitor? No. Iruka wanted to hit himself. Standard transformation was an academy-level jutsu. He knew that, he was an academy instructor himself. It didn't take particular skill to fool an academy student with one. Most any ninja, from Konoha or not, could have transformed to look like Mizuki and use his emotionally vulnerable student to steal important and dangerous secrets from Konoha. "Naruto, what have you done?" yelled another voice the indicated blonde and the scarred instructor recognized. This was Mizuki now, or if not, was under a good enough transformation that Iruka couldn't tell the difference. "Mizuki-sensei," stuttered the blonde slightly. "You've got to tell him. I was supposed to take this scroll to pass." "I don't know what you're talking about," the newly arrived silver-haired instructor replied, sounding even more irate as his co-worker. "Is this some kind of story you're weaving to get away with stealing?" "Iruka, you've got to believe me. He talked to me outside after I failed the test." The boy pleaded with his other instructor. "He said how Rock Lee became a ninja by impressing a winged jounin." "What?" was all that the pony-tailed instructor could respond. "Naruto," has co-instructor Mizuki began in a somewhat mocking tone, "to take someone under your wing doesn't mean the person literally has wings." Iruka turned to him, a little suspicious. "Mizuki?" he began. Naruto didn't say anything about anyone taking anyone else under their wing. Outskirts of Konoha. A mistake. The silver-haired instructor went into damage control. I overheard the original conversation," he explained, silently cursing when he realized that he had just made his situation much worse in his attempt to fix it. Why didn't he just say he had guessed it was the idiom? No, why did he think to correct the boy's misunderstanding now? Why was Iruka even here? He had to tell him to seem legitimate, but he really had expected to be the first to find the wayward blonde. "You overheard him talking with someone impersonating you?" Iruka questioned, calm at first, but sounding more and more uncertain. "And you didn't think to stop it? Or report it? Damn it. He was supposed to be able to off the little demon playing at ninja, take the scroll, and be on his merry way. Now, though it was falling apart and soon he'd be dealing with a chunin in combat. Not that he held his co-worker and admittedly once friend up as a standard of ninja skill, but he was certainly no jutsu-less academy student. He had to act now, before the other instructor worked up the nerve. So, he took out a brace of shuriken and sent them flying. However, Iruka Yamino wasn't a chunin for nothing, and he quickly jumped back to avoid the sudden attack. Mizuki considered the situation. If the battle picked up now, it could be 2-on-1 if the blonde attacked back. Those weren't odds he wanted, the boy wasn't experienced, and he wanted to kill the demon anyway. No time left to think, he had to act now. He quickly grabbed out an already loose giant shuriken and let it fly at the failed academy student, hoping to remove him from the fight immediately. The boy didn't have the years of experience of his fellow instructor and was about to be slain by the spinning metal weapon. If not for that fellow instructor. Outskirts of Konoha. The sickening sound of one of the sharp metal blades of the giant shuriken burying itself in his favorite instructor, and indeed one of the few people he could call a friend, shook the boy to the core. Iruka. He barely got out. About 20 feet away from where he had been starting to stand with the scroll, Iruka had jumped between himself and the traitor's weapon. He started to lose his balance, falling down onto his hands, his thoughts completely awry. This was wrong. Iruka didn't get hurt. This was wrong. Iruka never got hurt, not really, and not for him. In some absolute universal way, the blonde knew that what had just happened was wrong. But that didn't change reality. He still saw Iruka's back, a metal blade piercing slightly through a bit on the side, and blood running down his vest. He hardly even heard the traitor's response to the situation. "I don't understand why you'd want to protect him, Iruka," Mizuki said with a smug tone and a smirk. "After all, didn't he murder your parents?" He's Thethish. The blonde didn't even notice how the traitor didn't finish his sentence, or how his smirk fell into a slack jaw, or how his eyes widened in their sockets. Hokage's office. The Hokage had thought something was amiss when he sensed a blonde academy student sneaking through his residence. He'd instructed those present to avoid alerting him that they were aware of his presence, to see what he would do. It was abnormal for the boy to do something like this, so Hiruzen Sarutobi suspected there was another player in this scheme. As such, he sent several Anbu agents to discreetly follow the boy and figure out who was behind the scheme while he observed from the crystal ball in his office, raising the alarm in the village after a bit to match the expectations of the unseen agent. Eventually, the blonde stopped in the forests outside of town, a proud look on his face, as the undetected Anbu began to discreetly circle the area. The boy then stopped to read the scroll, the proud look quickly becoming a frustrated one as he tried out various seals, to no avail. If the Hokage hadn't known how his poor chakra control prevented him from using jutsu, he might have been worried, but the unstable flow prevented him from molding any of the dangerous jutsu in the scroll. He was alarmed at first when chunin and academy instructor Iruka Yamino was the first to arrive, but thankfully, he was just chasing his student due to the alarm and genuine concern for the boy. He was again alarmed when chunin and academy instructor Mizuki arrived and turned out to indeed be a traitor. He was thankful Iruka hadn't been. He saw his Anbu beginning to move and when Mizuki suddenly attacked twice in rapid succession, wounding the self-sacrificing Iruka, who would be getting a raise when all of this was over. It was time for the Anbu make the rest and get the wounded teacher to a hospital after quick field patching, and none too soon, as the Hokage's stiff grip on the crystal ball betrayed his nerves through the incident. And then, Hiruzen Sarutobi saw something else. Something that neither he nor anyone else in Konoha had ever wanted to see again. The crystal ball cracked between the Hokage's anxiously crushing hands, and the god of shinobi jumped as quickly as he could out of his office window. Still wearing his formal robes of office, he moved with his top speed, crossing town in a matter of seconds with chain body flickers, hoping against hope that he might stop what he saw. In Konoha. The alarm raised in the village about the stolen scroll had the shinobi out searching and keeping alert, but nobody was expecting anything too major to come of it. Suddenly, though, everyone, shinobi or civilian, could feel something washing over the town. It was like a massive, overwhelming, horrifying, suffocating, and for some, worst of all, familiar presence. An absurd level of chakra was flaring from somewhere on the edge of town and radiating a killing intent that paralyzed people throughout the village. It was visible just over the trees. Illuminated in the moonlight, gigantic orange-red appendages were clearly visible over a mostly concealed body. The nine-tailed demon fox, the very monster that 12 years ago had ravaged their town and slaughtered their families, was there, fully formed, within the walls of Konoha once again. Closer. Hiruzen Sarutobi was on the scene as quickly as possible, summoning King Enma for whatever combat could be managed to push back the beast. Nearby, every single elite jounin or Anbu in the village was quickly gathering for the confrontation. The beast was laying down, crushed trees beneath its body. The Hokage morbidly suspected that there were also crushed Anbu agents that hadn't been able to get out in time when it appeared, but that was a concern for later. The fox's tails moved slowly, unlike the vicious thrashing they had displayed when it first attacked. Its eyes were half closed and its limbs spread out on the ground, not propping it up. Then the eyes caught sight of the old Hokage and both opened fully. The beast's lips opened slightly, revealing horrifying, sharp teeth. The god of shinobi prepared for battle. But he wasn't prepared for what happened next as the horrible killing intent suddenly subsided and the fox's massive jaw began to move. "Oh old man. What's going on? What happened?" It said with a deep booming voice, its head turning and looking around. "Why are all these people here? And we are you all so small?" Outskirts of Konoha. The Nine Tails has broken free. The Nine Tails is about to attack Konoha and kill us all. There's no Uzumaki left to seal it in. The Nine Tails called me old man. The Nine Tails just called me old man. The whirlwind that was Hiruzen Sarutobi's thoughts seemed to just freeze on that last note. They were apparently frozen long enough for others to notice, too. "Old man?" asked the giant fox again. The Hokage forced himself to sound reassuring and a good deal more confident than he actually felt. "Naruto, everything's going to be alright, just stay calm." "Yes, calm down, Hiruzen. Whatever the situation, you're the Hokage, damn it, you don't get to panic. Even if you're facing the single most dangerous entity in the elemental nations. Which you may have just insulted to its face by calling it Naruto." He didn't calm himself down particularly well. The fox's facial features appeared to even out somewhat, though even the professor didn't have a great deal of experience reading the feelings of tailed beast. As he examined, though, he began to see them, adjusting to the unusual features. Shock. Sadness. Fear. Anxiety. Betrayal. Traces of anger, but outweighed by far by the rest of the emotions. Despite the large teeth and slitted eyes, this was not the face of a rampaging beast, and the inaction thus far supported the conclusion. Naruto's in there. Then, the fear he saw on the giant vulpine face suddenly spiked. Iruka-sensei. Old man, Iruka-sensei got hurt. Then the giant nine-tailed fox started moving, pushing itself up. Hiruzen saw what was happening too late to stop it. "No. Naruto, don't try to." The gargantuan fox lifted itself up on its arms and then rocked onto its hind legs as if trying to stand on 2 feet. On 2 human feet, which it didn't have. The gigantic fox towered even further over everything for a moment as it was precariously balanced on its 2 rear legs before it suddenly overbalanced and toppled backwards, landing back on the ground with massive crash and a tremendous cloud of dust. As the dust cleared, more of the forest was smashed beneath the giant body, along with part of the wall an arm had landed on. Fortunately, the shinobi in the area had been wary and had rapidly moved well clear of the giant fox. The Hokage quickly jumped toward the new location of the beast's head. "Naruto Uzumaki, do not move," he commanded with the authority only the god of shinobi could bring to bear in his voice. The beast immediately ceased attempts to right itself again and just lay on its back, staring at the man from its upturned perspective. "That settles it. Naruto-kun's in control of the body. The day the Nine Tails follows my orders is the day I eat my hat." "But, Iruka-sensei?" the transformed boy asked tentatively, its body completely rigid due to the Hokage's command. "Will be taken care of," he said, signaling a rather shaken medic nin who had accompanied him to head back. Sure enough, he saw the medic carrying the grievously wounded instructor away. At first glance, the injury looked career-ending, but there was time later to determine that. Now, he had to handle the situation. "I need everyone but myself, Naruto and Tenzo to leave away from the immediate area," he commanded to the remaining ninja. He didn't want anyone possibly threatening around for this. He was dealing with a scared little boy. A scared little boy with the power and possibly the lack of control to level a small country or a large one, given time. After a few minutes, the rest besides the Hokage and the Anbu in the immediate area, including a few that were on top of the fox searching for crushed agents, had cleared out and the Hokage made his intention known. "Okay, Naruto, there's something I have to tell you, but we're going to want to get you off your back. Now just roll to your left, then hold still again." Outskirts of Konoha. A few tense and rather loud moments later, the blonde turned and body was laying on his stomach once again, all limbs extricated from whatever walls or newly formed trenches they were in. He lay there as still as possible, avoiding any sudden and possibly dangerous movements with his gigantic unfamiliar limbs, including the multiple tails he had felt he had. While he wasn't exactly calm and collected about his situation, his own fears were nothing compared to the colossal, oppressive terror he could feel beyond his own mind. Every man, woman and child in Konoha was in fear for their homes, their families and their lives, and he could feel it, oh could he feel it. And besides the sudden terror of an entire city, other myriad worries played over and over in his mind. Why was he suddenly huge like this? Was he going to be like this forever? Was he ever really a human? What would Iruka say to him if he saw him? What about Tucci and Am? Why did he have tails? Was it him everyone was afraid of? "Naruto-kun, how are you feeling?" asked the old man, with a friendlier tone and a smile, though he could faintly feel fear behind it. The indicated boy responded to the question though, if not very eloquently. "Everyone's scared and I'm really big and I can't stand up and I feel really weird and I don't know why and I'm scared too and I want to change back," he explained as well as he could. "Well, I think we can do something to change you back." That was what the transformed blonde was hoping to hear. The Hokage motioned for the one Anbu he'd called to remain, who wore a vague cat-like mask. "Naruto, this is Tenzo, one of my most trusted operatives. He has a special power that I believe will be able to help you." Tenzo, as he had been referred to earlier, approached the giant fox-formed boy. Though his expression was hidden behind a cat-like mask, the boy could still sense his fear, greater than that of the old man. "I need you to calm down and remain as still as you can," the masked man instructed. Doing so as well as he could, the blonde boy tried to relax. If he could just calm down, he could be back to normal. Everything would be okay, he'd be the slightly short boy with spiky blonde hair, blue eyes, and whisker-like markings on his face, and everyone would stop being afraid of him. This was enough to get him at peace, even with all his questions. The man's hand glowed with a strange light as he touched the boy's transformed fur-covered chest with some kind of sealing jutsu and then drew back, a trail of blue light leading from his hand to the place he had touched. Wooden totems sprang up around the gigantic body and slowly but surely, the chakra forming the gigantic fox body began to recede. Outskirts of Konoha. It took an hour to completely reseal the tailed beast's tremendous chakra, leaving the boy looking exhausted but back in his normal form. Well, almost. His teeth looked sharper than the Hokage remembered and his nails looked particularly untrimmed and dangerous. But at least the boy wasn't likely to crush the landscape with an errant twitch. Worries of how the blonde looked were put on hold for now, though. For his own safety and, Hiruzen had to admit, his own aversion to wanting to saddle the boy with this issue, he had put this off, but no longer. He deserved an explanation. By all rights, he should have had one long before anything like this happened, but life was never truly predictable. Now, Naruto, there is a lot to explain here, but I'll start with the most important part. Naruto Uzumaki, you are not responsible for the attack 12 years ago. The blood of those that died then is in no way on your hands, and do not let others lead you to believe otherwise. Happily, the rather unsettled expression on the boy relaxed at least somewhat in relief. Seeing this, the Hokage continued his explanation. He explained that the boy was a Jinchuriki, the power of human sacrifice, or a demon container. He said that the nine-tailed demon fox is sealed inside of the boy, but the boy was not himself the fox. The beast could not be killed, so the fourth Hokage instead sealed it in a newborn baby. Why me? The newly labeled Jinchuriki asked rather reasonably. Hiruzen measured his answer carefully. I'm afraid I can't say why he sealed the fox and you in particular. The third Hokage continued to explain to the boy as they stood in the forests on the outskirts. There were a few things he wanted to be sure the student was aware of. First, he was not the only Jinchuriki. There were 9 total tailed beasts, organized in power by number of tails, with the boy's 9 tails as the strongest. Each major village and one minor village had one or more of their members as Jinchuriki to contain those beasts. But the boy's questions now largely answered, he had to ask his own. Now, Naruto, I need to ask, he began. When you transformed into the fox, what did you feel? Well, like I said, I felt really big and scared and confused, the boy replied. Well, yes, he admitted, considering how to get at his question tactfully, though he'd store some of this knowledge away for later. I mean, did you feel, for instance, angry? The boy remained silent for a moment, in thought. I don't remember being angry or anything like that. No feelings of particular aggression. Nope. That was promising. The Hokage continued his interview. Did you hear any kind of, say, voice? Was there a Somian telling you to attack or anything like that? Nothing like that, but actually, I think I was angry, besides just sad, the boy replied, his tone and expression darkening. Well, considering what had just happened beforehand, that was reasonable. Hiruzen himself was more than a little angry about that incident. That bastard Traitor tried to. It's okay, I know what happened, the Hokage interrupted in what he hoped was a sufficiently comforting tone. Having the boy think back too closely on the event that emotionally distressed him enough that he turned into a giant monster wasn't high on the list of things the professor considered good ideas. Move on for now. Iruka has been taken to the hospital for treatment, he will probably survive. Mizuki will be posthumously charged for his treasonous actions. And the scroll of seals was reduced to ash by direct contact with a gigantic flare-up of demonic chakra, and at least one Anbu agent was probably crushed, but those tidbits didn't need to be mentioned right now. He also had a bit of personally good news for the boy. Also, Naruto, after what I've seen recently, I've made a determination regarding you, he began. Despite your lack of jutsu, you show skill in what you can do, and I hereby declare you a genin of Konoha. The very recent events also contributed to the situation, in that leaving a questionably stable Jinchuriki capable of a full-tailed beast transformation as a civilian was a recipe for innumerable issues. But again, tidbits that didn't need to be mentioned right now. Fortunately, the boy took well to what was said. The Hokage smiled genuinely. Such excitement and joy were rarely seen on the face of the fairly calm boy. Then the excitement seemed to get to the boy a bit too much, though, as a sudden surge of powerful demonic chakra welled up around him. Tenzo tried to quickly restart the sealing jutsu to quickly quell the impending transformation with a yet uncut link, but to no avail. The Anbu and the Hokage quickly jumped back and out of the way. In a moment, they once again looked up at the nine-tailed demon fox. What? Stuttered the again transformed Jinchuriki in shock. We can fix this, Naruto-kun, the Hokage quickly yelled. Just stay calm. Tenzo took a soldier pill and immediately began the jutsu again. The Hokage knew that this was not a sustainable solution, but at least some new insight was gained. The full transformation wasn't specifically caused by a strong negative emotion, a strong positive one worked as well. But surely the boy had felt strong positive emotions before, such as his initial admittance to the academy. Perhaps the incident with the traitor Mizuki had made the transformation more readily occurring. As he watched the giant fox body slowly starting to recede for the second time that day, he knew he still wasn't done. The Jinchuriki wasn't the only one who needed to be calmed down now. In Konoha. Here is in Saratobi, the third Hokage had to make an announcement to calm the hastily assembled population of the village early that morning. The sudden reappearance of the nine tails inside the walls, even as relatively innocuous as it was, wasn't something to just expect the general populace to shrug off. It'd be nice if he had some kind of chance ahead of time to plan out the speech, but if he had known ahead of time, he'd have a lot more than a speech ready. For now, he had to calm the populace of immediate panic, explain in sufficient detail to assuage future fears, getting the newest generation at least somewhat informed. This had to be done while being honest enough to prevent loss of faith from the citizenry and shinobi, while still avoiding letting out information that spies could take advantage of. People of Konoha, he began, you all are aware at least somewhat of the events of today. Let it be known that the nine-tailed demon fox seen today is not the beast as it attacked us before and is not going to attack the village at large. Good, the most important point done. Next, the fear-assuaging explanation and the balancing act therein. He explained much of what he had already said to the Jinchuriki himself, though without indicating who the Jinchuriki was, nor giving any specific indication of what the Jinchuriki's age might be. By the end of the week, most every major and minor hidden village would be aware of the sudden but essentially safe appearance of the nine tails in the village. They determined that it was Konoha's Jinchuriki and would gauge their power appropriately, but the Hokage would be sure they knew as little as possible about the identity of that Jinchuriki. That said, he held no illusions. Some would find out, and fairly soon. Eventually, the speech came to an end. The populace had been assured as much as possible that the village's Jinchuriki was not a direct threat to them, and the new generation had been introduced to the concept of a Jinchuriki. Hopefully, the business would continue essentially unhindered, but the Hokage held no illusions. He was an eloquent speaker and he doubted any other person would have handled it half as well, but he couldn't solve everything. Konoha would be changed from this day on. Maybe subtly, in the long run, but the change would be there. Now he just had to recall a certain toad summoning student of his. Of course now of all times, the man was on the opposite side of the land of lightning. Konoha. For the younger generation, the nine-tailed demon fox had been mostly a story. Conceptually, it was a giant dangerous monster that had nearly destroyed their home and loved ones, but for all practical purposes, it was something to be heard of, rather than that could conceivably actually harm them. Until a few nights ago, anyway. One rather lazy boy with brown hair, typically done up in a pineapple-shaped topknot, had been asleep, as he and the rest of the Nara clan was wont to be. Then, out of nowhere, a crushing, suffocating presence was upon him, jarring him awake. His mother, Yoshino, had barged into his room, a look of absolute panic on her face, hauling him out of bed in order to make it to an underground shelter. It took some time for him to work up the nerve to ask what was going on as they traveled through interconnected tunnels, but he would never forget how his mother simply said, "The Nine Tails is back." For a time, the two waited with other members of their clan, as well as some other families who had come from other entries, to hear if they should evacuate the town entirely. He was vaguely aware that at some point, the murderous edge of the chakra had reduced, but still felt horribly oppressive on him. He couldn't track the time reliably, but at some point his father, Shikaku, had shown up to give an all-clear sign. "All clear my ass," Yoshino had responded. It wasn't until the heavy feeling had totally subsided some time later that he and his mother has crept out of the underground and outside. Of course, shortly after he had come outside, the massive chakra had again spiked, nearly knocking him and the others leaving the shelter off of their feet. He could see the source just north by the wall, where gigantic tails waved in the sky. The Shikamaru Nara and all the rest of the aspiring ninjas who now sat in the academy, back for the first time since that night, the stories they'd heard from their elders were now very, very real. The looks of the people on the street in the days since then didn't help his morale. Neither did the fact that two instructors were missing, though he had heard that at least one was in the hospital. The nondescript substitute standing in for Iruka and Mizuki was listing off the teams. He himself had been assigned to Team 10, along with Ino Yamanaka and Choji Akimichi. Ino, a young girl with platinum blonde hair and a long ponytail, was normally the type to object, but Shikamaru noted that she didn't protest at all, even when a certain black-haired boy she had been chasing after had been assigned to a team alone with her once friend and now chief rival for his affections. Now that he thought about it, that Team 7, if he remembered correctly. It wasn't something he'd heard of before, a team of two genin, but it was reasonable enough. He supposed the number of graduates was just not divisible by 3. They'd probably be joined by another genin that had already finished the academy. But that didn't quite ring true, either. The 2 on that team were already the top of the class. Having an experienced genin as their 3rd member made it blatantly imbalanced. Chakra. That same damn troublesome chakra, somewhere beyond the wall outside of where civilians might feel it, but not far enough that the shinobi population couldn't. He shuddered slightly and noticed a few others following suit, though not as many as there might have been. It had to be intentional. It wasn't the first time since that night that he'd felt it. Thinking back to what the Hokage had announced, Jinchuriki were an important resource to Konoha as a whole, he knew that mentally. As troublesome as dealing with oppressive chakra waves from their strange ally was, it was still far less troublesome than being without such an ally when an enemy nation decided to use theirs. Alongside the Jinchuriki needing to learn how to use that massive power, the shinobi forces had to be acclimatized to their demon-wielding ally in order to not freeze up or panic in combat if he or she should ever be brought to bear. Given what happened with the clearly unexpected event a few nights back, it wasn't something they were ready for otherwise. The all too suspiciously timed hospitalization of one instructor and disappearance of the other, though, had him wondering. The Hokage had claimed that their Jinchuriki was safe, but he had a lot of trouble thinking of anything that could be felt from miles away like this as truly safe. There was something going on. Something with the absent instructors. Something that had to do with that Jinchuriki. A puzzle that wouldn't leave him alone. Now, what had he been thinking about before his thoughts had been interrupted? There was another puzzle already in progress. Something about the team composition, but he. Team 10? Called a voice. He looked up and saw a dark-haired man with a beard and a cigarette. Well, troublesome. He'd get back to it eventually. Probably. Konoha. The sun was up. It was time to get up. Time for him to move. He needed to go to the academy. He needed to learn to be a ninja. To become respected. To be known. To be a person for real like everyone else. People turned and looked at him. They weren't ignoring him, finally. But they were terrified. Why? He was almost there. He could see the door and he knew Iruka-sensei would be waiting inside. But then, as he reached for the door, his hand crashed through the door and the wall. He looked down at the ruined wall and saw his sensei beneath his clawed hand. He had just he didn't mean to. Immediately recoiling, he rocked back and fell over. Scrambling back up, he saw the ruins of the Ichiraku's ramen where he had fallen. Had he really? As he looked up, he saw everyone running, except the Anbu. They were all standing nearby, facing him, weapons drawn. He swore he could see them all shaking, he could feel their terror, but they were here for him. And then finally the old man Hokage arrived. His normally friendly face gone. He was filled with hate. Then he began to run through seals. He looked around and walls began to appear around him, slowly expanding to enclose him. No. He wasn't a monster. He didn't mean to hurt them. Iruka-sensei was his friend. He wouldn't hurt him. He'd never hurt him. The walls closed in and began to press inward. Maybe it was better this way. He'd be gone. He couldn't hurt anyone else. Wouldn't fill them with fear and hate. He hated hurting people like that anyway. He was supposed to protect them. The walls were pressing him now. Now crushing him. Like he crushed Iruka-sensei. Like he crushed Tuchi and Aim. He could feel the pain, hear the cracking as. North of Konoha. The Jinchuriki woke up late in the morning to find he had transformed in his sleep, blasting apart the small wooden building he had been sleeping in as Hisno. The fox's gigantic limbs and tails were sprawled out over the unpopulated woodland outside. He struggled to recall what was going on. He was being crushed, he thought, because he did something. He was being punished for something. Or what? The details were fleeting. Naruto. Called out his masked instructor, Tenzo, chasing out any remaining memory of the dream. He could feel the man's relatively minor fear of him in full clarity when he was transformed like this, and it didn't help him to focus. Good morning, sensei, Hisno, the fox's deep inhuman voice replied at an even level. One thing he had quickly been instructed about was that, when he was transformed, his voice carried more than well enough without trying to yell. The result was most of his responses being rather subdued, in tone if not actual decibels. Regardless, the Jinchuriki was unamused with the circumstances. I guess you'll have to, grow a new house, however you do that. To think I had a bad dream. I can't remember it now. The masked agent sighed. It's wood style, a bloodline limit. Anyway, if a dream's enough to set you off, then I really don't know if there's a real solution down this path. He had been training to control his emotions better, hopefully to prevent all these shape shifts. As it was, since that night, he had been set off by lesser and lesser ups and downs, most insidiously by apprehension about accidentally transforming. After the first 2 times on that night, it was essentially becoming uncontrollable, and reverting the transformation was taking a toll on his new instructor. The man could run on soldier pills only so long. One night, the Jinchuriki had just been left alone in that tailed beast form to get whatever sleep he could while his instructor had rested. The Jinchuriki had been reverted the next morning to discover his clothing had largely burned away, leaving him to wear a simple grey outfit. Orange had lost its appeal to the boy after he'd seen the fox's orange fur when he was transformed. Purely restricting his emotions wasn't getting results. He could force himself to remain calm, but with the combined effect of building apprehension of accidentally transforming, as well as the seemingly falling barriers to the transformation, it didn't work for very long. And now, he had this new problem. There was no way he could control what he felt in his dreams, and apparently they could set him off too. The result was that most of his training, rather than focusing on avoiding the tailed beast form, was instead about trying to control his chakra, as well as trying to figure out how to move around without wrecking everything within his rather considerable reach. Well then, this morning, we'll be moving on to a new method, his teacher explained. The Jinchuriki looked up a moment, noting the sun rather high in the sky, and wondered if this really still counted as morning, but his sleep schedule was already far off of normal. Is it a different way to try and stay human? He asked hopefully. I think it will help, his instructor responded. What I want you to do is essentially learn to mold and shape the tailed beast's chakra. The end goal is that you can prevent the transformation and maybe eventually withdraw it back into the seal manually without my help, but I don't know how possible that will be. Until you reach that, though, we'll settle for cutting down the miasma-like chakra you're emitting. With that, the genin set to work. Hopefully, this would work better than those emotion exercises that seemed to be putting him further behind. Konoha. A certain recently graduated Kunoichi with pale eyes was fraught with worry. She and her team had passed their Jounin sensei's test and she was finally a ninja. Maybe her father would finally have some kinder words to say. She didn't hold out much hope that he'd ever be the loving father with warm kind words she wished for, but he'd certainly been warmer these past few days. The need for the gigantic monster of their nightmares to suddenly show up in town to cause this was disconcerting, though. That said, neither her father's still fairly cold disposition nor its sudden change were the real cause of her worry. Since that night, she hadn't seen a certain boy from her class. One that was important to her, whether he knew it or not. He was a boy about her age with blonde hair and an orange jumpsuit and faint markings that resembled whiskers on his face. He wasn't the smartest nor the strongest, but he had a certain something, some kind of pride that kept him moving, despite how people seemed to treat him. And also, Schulz liked how he looked. She wouldn't go into more detail, not even to herself. There was also a time when Sheer saw him with her Byakugan active, a special bloodline limit from her family that allowed her to see chakra through walls, around her, and other details. She hadn't seen him, and the problem was that his disappearance coincided with that night. That was the real cause of her concern. The Hokage had said that the Jinchuriki's transformation had been safe and there was no need to fear him or her, but with her classmates suddenly nowhere to be found in town, her imagination ran wild in its slowly building panic. She couldn't ask her clan, they'd immediately ask why she was worried about some clanless failure, though that exact term would probably only be used by her cousin. She worked up the nerve to ask a few other villagers, such as a father and daughter, that worked at a raiment stand he frequented, but they didn't answer, for some reason. Presumably, they didn't know. But Iruka sensei, their former instructor. She'd heard he was in the hospital, also since that night. She was running out of leads, and she knew he was close to her blonde classmate. Well, relatively so, anyway. This whole chain of thoughts was why she now found herself waiting inside Konoha's hospital. Soon enough, she was led to a room, wherein she found the academy instructor laying down on a bed, bandaged around his torso. Hello, Iruka sensei, she said, forcing herself mostly calm. Her instructor looked almost as if he had aged 20 years since she last saw him. Oh, hello, Hinata, he replied. What can I do for you today? Nothing too strenuous, I hope. He chuckled slightly, but she could tell he wasn't quite so happy as his demeanor implied. Then not much, I just wanted to ask you about something, she began. About a few nights ago she paused. When, it appeared. Iruka began to speak while she had again paused. I'm sorry, Hinata, but I can't tell you the exact details of my injuries. That wasn't what she wanted to ask, but it definitely raised some questions. That said, she was having enough trouble raising her own question. She steeled her nerves. I just want to know. Do you know where Naruto-kun is? I haven't seen him since then. She finally asked. Iruka looked anywhere but at her from his bed. His expression was sad. Guilty. Uncertain. Fearful. He clearly knew something, but it was bad news. Whatever he knew, though, he was completely silent. She felt her heart sinking as the silence dragged on and on. It must have shown on her face, though, because when he did suddenly notice it, he was quick to respond again. No, it's not like that. Naruto is alive. He's just the bedridden instructor sighed. He's out for the moment. I can't tell you more. Konoha Hospital. The lazy, newly minted genin had been showing uncharacteristic initiative in heading to meet his hospitalized instructor when he discovered a classmate already en route to the same, though likely with different purpose. Surprisingly, she didn't seem to notice him as she walked through the halls with surprising purpose. She began to meet with him first and he just decided to listen in for a time. A few lines jumped out to him. I can't tell you the exact details of my injuries. I haven't seen him since then. Naruto is alive. He's out for the moment. I can't tell you more. His blonde classmate was also missing since then, since that same night, and his bedridden former instructor knew about it. Those two and Mizuki were involved in something that night which had hospitalized one and made the other two essentially vanish. He continued his thoughts as he began to talk back down the hall. The Jinchuriki. If the Jinchuriki had injured two chunin and an academy student that night, it'd be covered up to avoid even greater disruption of the populace. But damn it, if there was a real danger, it couldn't be left alone like this. The Hokage was okay with it, but Shikamaru couldn't just accept it at face value. Still, he was out of leads. Well, almost out of leads. Of course, the last one. Oh, hello Shikamaru. His thoughts were again interrupted by the classmate he had followed here. Not that he really wanted to stay on that train of thought, anyway. Hey, he said simply. I was here to talk to Iruka-sensei, but I already heard what I needed. Thanks for that. Do you know anything about Naruto-kun? She asked him. No. Not for certain, no, but I have some guesses. He organized his thoughts a bit. The night he vanished was the same night Asted. That's also when Mizuki-sensei vanished and Iruka-sensei was hospitalized, he began to explain. But, it could be coincidence, so take it with a grain of salt. The Hokage, in his speech, downplayed the direct threat of the Jinchuriki. Iruka-sensei's injuries and Mizuki-sensei's and Naruto's disappearances were also kept secret, which could point to the Jinchuriki being related, somehow. If the Jinchuriki was the cause, they'd want to avoid a panic, which is hard enough as it is. The shinobi in attendance would all be sworn to the same secrecy. So the only person to ask NN now as she began, hesitation evident. The Jinchuriki himself. Or herself, he finished. Then he added an addendum. If he or she isn't as sworn to secrecy as Iruka-sensei and all the shinobi that attended the incident. And if he or she has anything to do with any of the disappearances, which is still something of a leap of logic. With that, she walked briskly off. He supposed she'd given up for now, their last lead essentially unusable. Really? She was going to give up on this. She wasn't going to try and sneak out of the village, past trained shinobi, alone, as a person with a very specific history as a victim of kidnapping, due to her heritage and position, with the express purpose of interrogating the single most dangerous entity currently present on the earth. Right? Troublesome. Hey Hinata. Wait. He yelled as he ran to catch up to her. What is it? She asked. You're not going to try and confront the Jinchuriki, are you? He asked seriously. Her pale eyes widened considerably. No. Of course and not. That's practically suicide. She exclaimed. I was going to talk to Ino. Half the ninja in T-town showed up that night maybe more. Even if they don't talk directly about it, at least one is sure to let something slip. And if anyone would hear about that, a gossip like Ino would be the one to ask. That was brilliant, actually. He felt kind of dumb having assumed the former, now. Yamanaka flowers. A certain blonde-haired Kunoichi had been in a kind of funk the past few days. She'd managed to pass the second genin exam, but only just. She'd been unable to really focus as much as she wanted, unable to even really pine after the best and dreamiest shinobi of their class. She felt like she was just kind of going through the motions as she attended the family flower shop's desk. Welcome to Yamanaka Flowers, she announced as the door opened, putting on a fake smile. She then noticed that the customers were familiar. Her lazy teammate and the class's shrinking Violet. What was most jarring was their request. Hello Ino. We're here to ask about our recent gossip, said Hinata, with relatively little stutter. For these two to be together asking for gossip, there had to be some underlying reason. That said, despite being a bit out of sorts, she had heard plenty of interesting things lately. So, she put up an away sign at the door and started in. The completely open topic left her free to speak as she wished. Rumors about the Nine Tails returning for revenge, rumors about the Jinchuriki coming to avenge the Nine Tails, gossip about unrequited love for a masked Jounin sensei, gossip about requited love between two of the new Jounin senseis. Rumors about the Nine Tails having turned over a new leaf, she suspected that was just someone's attempt at a pun. Hysterical announcements of the end of the world, a rumor about a theft from the Hokage's tower on that night, gossip about Sasuke liking long hair because it reminded him of his mother, further rumors about the Nine Tails and revenge. Rumors about completely mundane foxes rising up, some half-heard note in shush tones about a traitor, a rumor about the Nine Tails Jinchuriki going crazy, a rumor about a theft from the Hokage's office in the academy building on that night. She suspected it was the same theft as from the tower, just people confusing the two distinct locations. Rumors about Iruka-sensei being in the hospital, she saw a faint shift in Shikamaru's expression at that, an overheard statement that the Nine Tails called the Hokage an old man, a rumor that the Hokage was somehow able to control the Nine Tails like Madara Uchiha, rumors about the One-Tails, or One-Tailed. Or One Tail coming from Suna to help fight the Nine Tails. She'd heard it pronounced all three ways, and she wasn't sure why this rumor was so persistent, given the sound rejection she'd heard along with it each time, occasional muttering about that heavy, far-off chakra, as if it had nothing to do with the Nine Tails or its Jinchuriki, more gossip about Sasuke. This time that he preferred short hair because it didn't remind him of his mother, a muttering about a manhunt for their other blonde classmate on that night. She saw Hinata's eyes widen at that, a rumor about Iruka executing a traitor, gossip about Sharingan Kakashi, a rumor about the Nine Tails executing a traitor, gossip about a depressed special jounin whose girlfriend died recently. Reports of increased psychological troubles brought before the Yamanaka clan, and a few more unspecified rumors about the Nine Tails and/or its Jinchuriki just for good measure. It felt pretty good to get back to talking to people like this, something she'd been out of for a bit. It helped let her think about other things than her own fears for the future and was just generally familiar for her. Maybe after all this was done, she would try and mend bridges with Sakura so they could talk like this again. That said, her contentedness didn't mean she'd let her two visitors leave unquestioned. "So, you two aren't normally so excited in the news I found out," she began with a wry grin. "What's the story?" Well, we talked to Iruka-sensei earlier," Hinata began. "Oh, how's he doing? Is he really in the hospital?" Ino interrupted. "Why yes. He's not looking very healthy," Hinata admitted. Since he was hospitalized on the same night, we thought he'd know something about Naruto-kun. Haven't seen him for days. Her stutter was particularly harsh on the last sentence. "And not since that night. We think the Jinchuriki's sudden activity is related to both of them, as well as Mizuki-sensei's disappearance," the lazy boy continued. "We're hoping that we can piece together something from what we heard from you." "Well, I helped you out, so I want in on this." This sounded more exciting than 1,000 of the other Nine Tails Jinchuriki rumors. And she was fairly certain there were indeed 1,000 of them. North of Konoha. Anbu Captain Tenzo had dealt with many things during his time in Anbu. Some terrifying, some unsettling, some exhausting, some confusing, and some actually rather amusing. Still, the events of the last few days with the Jinchuriki were by far the most unique. For terror, there was, of course, the first night when the Nine Tails suddenly appeared in the village. He had suspected he'd be helping train the boy at some time and would have to deal with the fox then, but was taken completely by surprise by what seemed like a catastrophic failure of the seal. Even now, he couldn't say he wasn't afraid, if only slightly. For unsettling, there was talking with the boy when he was stuck in the Nine Tails form for the first while. Having a conversation with a gigantic monster with a booming voice that speaks with the mannerisms of a determined but emotionally vulnerable child was off-putting, to say the least. For exhausting, there was the persistent effort to revert the boy's transformations. He burned through so much chakra, and even then, he was only able to do the action slowly and with the Jinchuriki's full cooperation. He was constantly taking soldier pills and naps to keep up with the needs. For confusing, there was the circumstances in general. What kind of seal did the fourth make that allowed this to happen? It was brilliant in that it allowed the full use of the fox's power with apparently no influence from the fox itself. It was broken in its inability to keep that power in check, resulting in the Jinchuriki constantly puffing up into a giant chakra monster. For amusing, there was physical exercise with the boy when transformed. He wondered if it may have helped allay the villagers' fears if they could come out to see the horrifying beast of their nightmares, stumbling clumsily around the countryside like a giant drunkard, apologizing for various splintered woodlands and leveled hillsides caused by missteps and errant tail movements. Truth be told, in full form, the boy was no lumbering beast. He was fast, with movement practically proportional to an ordinary fox. Combined with the absurdly disproportionate strength and the slowly increasing familiarity with that body, he would be a figurative beast as well as literal with taijutsu, if it could still be called that. Maybe Guy would have a new rival in that respect, though the Anbu captain foresaw the rivalry being possibly even more one-sided than the one with Kakashi. But still, the boy had greater obstacles than a bit of clumsiness. Until he could stabilize his caustic chakra, he was a danger to all nearby. The agent himself, even with his unique adaptations, couldn't touch the boy for long when he was fully transformed, and he knew for certain that it could be felt to some extent all across town, even from out here. Finally, though, there seemed to be good news on this front. "Hey, Tenzo-sensei. I'm ready to try again," the transformed boy called out to him in his booming voice. Tenzo quickly formed a wooden clone to attempt to test the boy's most recent attempts. It was a simple exercise. Put a wood clone into contact with the boy's transformed body and see if it survived. There had been great progress today with this, especially considering the exercise had only begun this morning. That said, progress didn't mean success. Thus far, every wood clone he'd sent out had died a horrible death of chakra poisoning, disintegrating into rotten, charred wood. The most recent had survived about 13 minutes of contact before it succumbed. This time, however, felt like it may be successful. The oppressive chakra the boy used to give off in this form was very much subdued. It probably couldn't even be felt in town anymore unless a sensor focused. Sure, if a sensor was nearby, the Jinchuriki would hide his chakra about as well as he hid his giant, orange and fuzzy fox body, but there may never really be a solution to that. The wood clone approached and touched a paw that was resting on the ground. After a short time, it spoke. "Very good, the pervasive chakra is held tightly to the body. You're now safe to touch," he reported happily. The boy grinned, or did what passed as a grin for a gigantic fox monster. It was almost certainly unnerving to someone who was unfamiliar with the boy, but to the Anbu agent, it was endearing. "Now, let's get you back to normal and try the same control," he said, as he prepared for the jutsu he'd become very familiar with. Inside Konoha. Hyuga, Nara, and Yamanaka were together in a flower shop. Rather than being the setup for a joke of some form, they were discussing gossip and giant monsters, as well as figurative separation of wheat and chaff. The two kunoichi sat on chairs Ino had brought out, while Shikamaru leaned against the desk. "So, we've got the following clues together," began Hinata, to try and sum up what they'd put together. "There was a theft from the Hokage, from W whatever building, that's not important. Their W was also a search order F for Naruto-kun. W we can't tell if the T2 were really are related, and I don't think N Naruto-kun would just steal for N no reason. That's the last we really see, can't say for certain of him. M maybe he was caught, M maybe he escaped, B but I don't think Iruka-sensei W would lie about him being alive, and H he would have to be somewhere if Iruka-sensei knew he W was alive. The Jinchuchuriki M might really have N nothing to do W with him being gone. While she really didn't want to be out of leads entirely for the blonde boy, she also really didn't want him anywhere near that thing." Shikamaru continued. "Later that night, or at least we assume later due to any other business like a search getting thrown out at this point, the senseis Mizuki and Iruka are both in the woods on the north side of town. No Nine Tails yet, the instructors are just there, for some reason. Then, there's the Nine Tails Jinchuriki there all of a sudden. Okay, the Jinchuriki was likely not there as suddenly, but the Nine Tails form definitely was. Around the time it shows up, there's some kind of traitor around. This traitor dies, either to Iruka-sensei or the Jinchuriki. Or Mizuki-sensei," interjected Ino. "Just because I didn't hear anyone mention Mizuki as possibly defeating the traitor doesn't mean nobody said anything about it. Then, Iruka-sensei is injured, and P probably M Mizuki-sensei, T2, B but he was even W worse," Hinata continued. "And now, if either one W was injured B by the T traitor, that'd be kept secret, B but the same would H happen if they were I injured by the J Jinchuriki. And he won't talk, Mizuki's missing, and we don't really have any leads on the traitor," the Nara said. "We're missing a piece, and most anything we put into place is speculation. So troublesome." She wasn't willing to leave it alone at that, though. W wait. W what about N Naruto-kun? Really, there had to be something they were missing about him. Iruka knew something about what happened to him. Iruka-sensei had a kind of sad look when I asked about him, she said finally. "So that's what that pause was?" responded Shikamaru, eyes slightly wider. He had only heard the conversation, the Hyuga Kunoichi suddenly recalled. But wait, he could just have heard about what happened to Naruto. He was always close to the boy. "And no, I think there W was M more to it." His expression. He seemed several things, B but it W was really the shy girl thought back. What was it exactly? It was fear. He was scared for Naruto. Asked Ino. "And no, he was scared of N Naruto-kun, I think," she finished, uncertain. Why would, Shikamaru's questioning stopped as his eyes widened and his grip on the edge of the counter tightened. Cold Naruto B. Hinata's heartbeat was suddenly about twice as fast. She suddenly thought back to what she'd once seen. She had tried to forget, like her father had told her to, but it had stuck with her, in the back of her mind. That one time, when she'd accidentally seen him with her Byakugan active, she saw our red chakra. What? Ino asked, confused. She apparently hadn't quite gotten as far in her thoughts yet. Then Naruto-kun has our red chakra, Hinata repeated, pale eyes wide, and her stutter intensifying. I once saw him, accidentally, with my Byakugan, he had our red chakra. And nobody else I've ever seen does. Wait, you mean? The platinum blonde began to say, before trailing off, her eyes also now quite wide. Stop, Shikamaru began. Put it together. Naruto is accused of stealing something, maybe he has or maybe he hasn't, he's out in the woods to hide himself or what was stolen or whatever. Iruka-sensei and Mizuki-sensei are looking for him because they're worried about him, and they find him. They also find the traitor, maybe the traitor finds them, then he or she attacks the senseis and Naruto gets really angry, and then you stop the discussion, came a deeper voice. The trio looked up and saw the elder platinum blonde, Inoichi Yamanaka. Nicely reasoned, Shikaku would be proud. But, these are S-rank secrets, and for good reason. You will not repeat any of this to anyone. The three dispersed soon thereafter, giving each other knowing, if dazed looks. It fit too well. The Nara summation was really just a formality at this point. The quiet blonde boy from class with unbreakable pride was the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed demon fox. North of Konoha. He had to hold on. The demonic chakra in the seal was relatively calm now, but the blonde Jinchuriki had to keep a grip on it. In case something happened. Because something always did. He was so pathetic, he'd be set off by anything from physical pain to being startled to bad dreams, and he couldn't stand it. He held on because he didn't like transforming. He didn't like seeing and feeling the fear in everyone around him. He didn't want to be a monster. He held on and he was suddenly struck in the gut, knocking him out of focus. Hold on. The demonic chakra in the seal started shifting to escape and turn him into a monster, and he wouldn't let it. He'd hold on. He'd beat this damn fox. So he could go back home. So he could go to his own room and eat at Ichiraku's with Iruka-sensei and the old man Hokage and talk to AM and Tucci. He could go back to how he was, it wasn't so bad being ignored, it was better than being hated and feared like that, looked at like a monster, being a monster, and he could have his life and friends and home back if he could just hold on. Just until the chakra calmed down. Just until he was safe. Just until. Now. The demonic chakra from the seal had returned to its normal flow, no longer threatening to surge out as it had been. He sighed and began to chuckle a bit, then to actually laugh as he lay down on the ground. His newest sensei approached in person, finally. He imagined a smile visible behind the man's Anbu mask. Congratulations, Naruto, he said warmly. He couldn't feel the man's fear now, even when he had felt it slightly before while in his human body. He'd have to practice, certainly, and it was still not a solution to transforming in the night, but it was more than he'd had. For the first time, he could say for sure. I'm not a monster, the boy said simply, a bit of pride in his voice. Team 10's training ground. So what now? Asked a platinum blonde Kunoichi, standing at the base of a tree between attempts to ascend. Now nothing, responded her lazy conversation partner, catching the oblique reference. The boy hadn't made quite so much progress up the tree as she had, though she did wonder how much he was really trying. She huffed. They'd just discovered the big secret, the truth, the reality. Everything was supposed to be different, everything was supposed to change. But, here they were, at training with their newly assigned Jounin sensei, basically going on as it had been. They hadn't even felt the chakra from their former classmate today, and around town, people seemed to be returning to their normal lives. So, we're safe, right? She queried, before running toward the tree once again. She focused chakra on her feet, not too much, not too little, and managed to get up to the second lowest branch available, where she could stop a moment. He's not a bad guy or anything like that. She remembered the boy. He was visually memorable, and she recalled he always failed to use ninjutsu or jinjutsu, but that he was pretty stealthy and tough in a hand-to-hand spar. Never cruel, but when someone thought he was below them, he showed a tougher side. Though when someone actually was tougher, like her Sasu-kun, well, he got pretty worked up. Other than that, he seemed to have a sense of right about lying. She'd notice how he might sometimes glare when someone told a lie in class, such as a lame excuse, or sometimes a pretty good one she might not have known if not for his subtle glare. Some of them, she wouldn't have recognized if not for seeing him glare, though he didn't catch some others she recognized. For now, I guess, he continued, having himself run up to the lowest branch on his own tree, which was lower than the lowest of her own, naturally, as they'd each picked a tree themselves. Yagus. Well, if things don't change, we're safe, somewhat enigmatically. But, she understood. So, if he remains himself. Around then, they had to cut off the discussion as their bearded sensei returned from helping out their portly teammate. North of Konoha. The couple days after first learning to hold himself under control, a certain blonde Jinchuriki woke up, fortunately still as a human, meaning the temporary house he'd been, grown was still intact, along with the simple cot he had been on. He was still practicing the control to deal with it and wasn't perfect yet. Yesterday, he'd had an incident where he'd fully transformed when one of his sensei's wood clones caught him by surprise. He'd managed to at least keep the caustic chakra at bay, so the wood clone had survived, though somewhat crushed due to being in close proximity to a rapidly growing object. Still, he knew he could do better, was doing better. He hadn't woken up just at random, though. As he looked around, he saw his masked sensei, or at least a wood clone, at the door to the building. "Naruto, we'll be having a visitor today," the man stated simply. "Is it the old man?" the boy asked. "Well, yes, but he's actually bringing someone else," the masked man replied. The Hokage had come to visit a few times, and the boy was happy to see him. The old man didn't fear him at all, while Tenzo-sensei was still slightly afraid. The boy grew hopeful, a faint smile showing up on his face. "Is it Iruka-sensei?" He hadn't seen his sensei since Uelthan. He had written some letters, though, and received some in turn. His sensei had been in the hospital, over which Iruka had written repeatedly not to feel guilt over, that it was his sensei's own choice to protect him. That said, he tended to avoid talking about how his condition was in details, just that he was getting better. Not him either, though he does wish to see you in person when he can. Well, he wasn't sure who else offhand. Maybe Tucci. Or Am. He'd gotten a letter from them and written back. He thought more. He also had gotten one letter from someone he hadn't expected. Was Hinata coming to visit? He didn't remember much about her, except that she was very shy and stuttered frequently. Oh, and she had wonderful penmanship. He thought she could do much more if she could learn to speak like she wrote. Now that he thought of it, wasn't she not supposed to know that he was a Jinchuriki? Some S-rank secret old man, he thought. Apparently, his musings had lasted a bit because Tenzo then proceeded to speak again, answering the question. "Jiraiya-sama of the legendary Sannin will be arriving today," he said, a hint of hope in his voice. The blonde thought a moment. History hadn't been his strongest subject at the academy, but he wasn't so dense as not to recall one of the strongest members of the village, even if he usually wasn't in the village. The man was a skilled shinobi, a toad summoner, and a powerful seal master. His face lit up. Konoha's greatest seal master since the fourth was coming to see him. He might be able to fix the seal so it stopped turning him into the fox. He might be able to hold on, stop, control it, hold on to it. He wouldn't transform now just because of some good news. He was better than that, he wasn't a weak-willed academy student who couldn't. There. He was safe again. Now he could respond. That's great, sensei. I can't wait to meet him." Despite being down a bit from his initial high point from the news, his voice still held hope. He hoped his sensei hadn't noticed the delay, but he couldn't tell if the man had through that funny mask. North of Konoha. An old man with a robe and the large hat of his office approached the lone wooden building, accompanied by a large man with long, white hair. Most anyone in Konoha could probably identify them as Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, and Jiraiya, the Toad Sage. "Sensei, I've told you when I first saw the seal that I couldn't explain it. It doesn't seem to work like any I've seen before," said the taller man. One night many years ago, he had seen the seal in question, which was supposed to seal the nine-tailed fox inside an infant. The apparent design was like one he'd been shown by his deceased student Minato, but when he examined it then, the way the chakra worked was nothing like described. Since the fox was certainly contained at the time, and the boy was essentially normal other than the seal and its curious effect on his chakra, he had to assume it was working correctly. Then he'd recently gotten a message to come home, informing him that Konoha's Jinchuriki had suddenly taken the form of the nine-tailed demon fox. At first, he'd been ready to charge home and help save what he could, well aware of what an out-of-control tailed beast could do, but the next sentence did clarify that the boy was, in fact, fully in control of the body. He was just not in control of his body's shape. Still, it was certainly a problem, and no small one, so off he went, hoping that this time, he may be able to finally understand the seal on his blonde godson. "I'll try, but I don't know what I can do," he said finally. His sensei's face held a look of resignation. "That's all we've been able to do so far. Try." The elder man had explained to him the evolving situation when he first arrived in his office. The boy had recently gotten a modicum of control, able to reduce the massive chakra presence and actively prevent a transformation, but he also had the problem of transforming in his sleep when he could put up no active resistance, though that had only occurred once so far, before he'd learned the resistance, in fact. Soon enough, they came upon the building, where an Anbu agent Tenzo, the wood-style user, according to his sensei stepped out, along with a blonde boy in a plain grey outfit. He recognized the boy as his godson. He recalled hearing that the boy had previously worn orange almost exclusively, but tastes could certainly change. He did notice that the boy wore a forehead protector with his dull outfit. "You're Jiraiya-sama, right?" the boy asked, almost with stars in his eyes. Jiraiya hadn't gotten much opportunity to get to know him before, but boy made a good impression on him so far. "You're the person who can fix my seal." He blanched a bit at that. "Well, brat, I'll look at it, but I should warn you," he began with a sigh, "I've looked at your seal before, back when it was first applied, and I couldn't understand the thing then." He saw the boy's mood deflate considerably at that, as expected, but then he saw him tense. "You okay, brat?" "Why yeah," the container stuttered. It didn't take a Sanin to realize something was up. "Let's see what we can do, eh?" He tried to give a reassuring grin as he formed a hand seal, creating a single shadow clone. North of Konoha. The clone the seal master created approached him, well the seal master himself, along with his own masked sensei and the old man, not to say that the seal master wasn't old, but certainly not as old, all backed off. Deep in his mind, he suspected it was for the best, but he still felt that they lacked faith in him. Jiraiya wasn't really as the boy had pictured in his mind. The formal, serious S-rank ninja he expected was this informal, joking man that called him a brat all the time. He wasn't sure what he thought of that and smiled to him in a familiar way. That said, he could feel the worry in him, as well as guilt. He tended to feel guilt in people who were lying, whether to him or another, but this was a slightly different form of it. This clone wasn't like his sensei's. It was made from nothing at all, but seemed to have a solid form. After a moment, he made the connection. A jutsu from that scroll he stupidly stole made clones like that, though the variant he saw was supposed to make a lot more than one. He supposed there had to be degrees of it. It wasn't always useful to have 100 clones walking around, especially for things like stealth missions. "Lift your shirt and then stand still a while, brat," the clone seal master instructed. As the man's hand touched the seal on his stomach, he felt the foreign chakra prodding through the seal, touching the demonic chakra slightly. He tensed as the hand suddenly jerked back slightly, the man wincing. But the fox's chakra was still reacting, hold and it stilled. Less than typical, certainly, but not nothing. He couldn't let that stop it. He could hold back the fox, he was certain of it. He had to now, so that he could get his seal fixed and go back to how he was. He'd tough it out. The toad sage's hand returned toward his stomach. This time, he felt a light aura of chakra around it, presumably some kind of protection from the fox. The prodding continued, and the blonde kept a firm grip on the fox's chakra, determined to see this through the end. As the examination continued, though, the foreign chakra interacted with the fox's more and more, and the grip had to be tightened. He wouldn't let it falter, though. He wasn't weak. He'd get through this. He was vaguely aware that the man's minor feelings of dissatisfaction were growing. Did this mean that he couldn't help? But he still didn't understand the seal. What happened next wasn't what the Jinchuriki had wanted. Was it the apprehension that the seal was unsolvable, his focus falling, or the examination itself? No one could say for sure, but the boy suddenly began to transform again, the fox's chakra solidifying again into a physical body. He looked down from his now towering perspective to see the middle-aged seal master looking back at him with wide eyes. He felt the fear in him, too, now, where it had previously been gone. Then an angry look appeared on the man's face as began to speak. "Brat, if I hadn't used a shadow clone, I could have died there, you know." The transformed boy was taken aback. "You must have felt it, you had to actively hold it back. If you felt that, why didn't you give a warning?" He struggled to respond. "Too thought I could hold it back," he responded weakly, which was ironic considering his voice. The man sighed. Not much to do about it now. I can't really continue examining now, but I'll go with what I've got for now and try to figure something out." The Hokage now spoke up. "Naruto-kun, please withdraw your chakra." The Jinchuriki sheepishly realized he'd forgotten about that bit. He quickly withdrew it into himself and noticed how the three in front of him became noticeably more relaxed. "Tenzo, please help Naruto-kun change back," the Hokage ordered his sensei. The Hokage then moved off to the side, presumably to talk with Jiraiya. Reverting would take an hour, though. He had to demonstrate some kind of control over his problem, show that he wasn't a lost cause after what just happened. But the seal. He'd learned over time that his normal body wasn't completely gone during the transformations. In fact, it was somewhere in the fox's forehead. He knew how to hold the chakra in the seal to avoid transforming by continuously pulling it back, and he knew how to pull his chakra into the fox body while transformed. If he could combine the two, then he could revert himself. He set to work on it immediately, finding the seal's location, and began to try and withdraw the chakra inside of it. His sensei, probably noticing that he was doing something, stalled, not attempting to activate his normal jutsu. It was difficult, trying to focus the chakra down into the small seal, but the seal seemed to be like a storage tank, and in a few moments the giant fox form was rapidly receding. But when he'd gotten around halfway done, it got harder. Much harder. He had to concentrate, to force the chakra in, but it was still doable, with enough effort. And he would put forth that effort, he wouldn't be stuck like this forever. He wasn't going to be dependent like that, and he wasn't going to be stuck like this. He was so caught up in it, he only faintly noted the yelling outside. It was only as the last of the chakra receded that he really heard something. And then Naruto. The old man was yelling. He looked up and saw the anguished face, and he felt the fear for him, clearer than it should have been, and some vague disappointment. Disappointment. The Hokage regained his composure and then spoke with authority. "Naruto, what did you just do?" "I turned myself back," he began. "I withdrew the chakra, like you said, but then I thought I might try and do that all the way into the seal, so I could just turn myself back." "And why did you decide to do this now?" the Hokage questioned. "It would eventually be useful, but we should have had Jiraiya's full opinion first. Furthermore, you should have had a lot more practice with controlling that chakra before trying to force it back like that. You'd just undergone an involuntary transformation a moment before." The Jinchuriki had no response for that. The Hokage then formed a clone, who walked up to him and took out a kunai. "Look at your eyes," the clone instructed. Looking into a reflective surface of the blade, he found them. The iris had become red, and the pupil slitted. His reversion hadn't worked completely. The clone put the kunai away and then pulled up the blonde shirt again. "It's changed," he muttered, the old man's voice betraying what the boy could already feel in him, with far more clarity than he should have been able to. The seal had changed visibly. His attempt to revert had done that much damage. He looked himself, and sure enough, the center of the spiral pattern was starting to fade. What would that mean about? Hold. Hold on. Keep it in, don't. Hold. 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 Why couldn't he? The fox's gigantic form spread uselessly over the land once again, its face beset by what only a few in the world could recognize immediately as sadness. The sound of its voice was recognizable as a deep wail. Outside Konoha. He had transformed. Again. Just north of Konoha, it was an increasingly common sight. The gigantic body of the nine-tailed demon fox appearing out of nowhere, with a startled expression that shifted into a pained, frustrated look, or more recently, just a look of plain despair. To keep Tenzo-sensei out of the hospital, they had agreed to limit the use of his jutsu for subduing the chakra to twice a day. Once just before the boy went to sleep, and once sometime during the morning, so there'd be time for him to rest a bit. This left the boy stuck in the tailed beast form more often than not. So, what does a shinobi do with large amounts of free time? Training. In the situation this shinobi was in, it was training with the fox's body. Even if he could hopefully have better control over the transformation again in the future, the fact of the matter was that the tailed beast form wasn't going away. So, he at least ought not to be a colossal klutz while he was stuck like this. He'd advanced beyond constantly tripping over his fox's limbs and tails, or crushing everything with stray movement. Now he was working a bit on more actual movements, such as precisely jumping from one point to another, should he have to move quickly in an area with little space for him to stand on. While useful in the long run, he wasn't happy with it. He was stuck in this depressing state because he screwed up. No other way around it. He had tried to do something to prove he could, and he couldn't, and it had cost him. Now, he could hardly hold his human form at all, his transformations triggered by things he couldn't even consciously notice. He began to miss things he had never really thought about. The ability to eat, for one thing. Well, he could devour an appreciable portion of the woodland and the creatures dwelling therein with the fox's body. The giant chakra construct didn't actually need to eat, and it didn't do much good for the small human body it enveloped. When he got reverted, he'd just have a soldier pill, if he needed it, and as much to drink as he could. Another thing he missed was actual human beings. Sure, he didn't have particularly much human interaction before, but he did talk with the Ichirokas, the old man Hokage, his senseis and the other students at the academy. Now, the only person he ever really interacted with was Tenzo-sensei. And he was always wearing that damn cat mask. Maybe I should ask if he could take it off sometime. The transformed boy thought as he narrowly held his balance after a leap. Even with Tenzo-sensei, the man was much smaller than his fox's hand. It seemed vaguely like he was talking to a toy ninja. A surprisingly intricate one, to be sure. You'd had to admit, it wasn't all bad. He could appreciate what he could do with this body that he couldn't with his own. He sniffed the air, and he could smell the forest and pick out everything in it. With massive ears, he listened in and heard the wind in the trees with clarity he could never have imagined before. He heard wild deer moving cautiously through the woodlands out of his range, and he could hear how they moved differently from the domesticated deer the Nara kept. It was almost like being in a completely different world, albeit a miniaturized one. He started moving and took a great leap, and he was able to cross the Naka River in a single step at the narrowest portions, and with a single leap at the widest within his area. He remembered its foreboding look in Konoha, and as a human, even as a ninja, he couldn't move like this. He could go anywhere, and no obstacle would hinder him for long. Maybe if he had to stay like this, he could be okay after a while. Running across the land, the wind in his fur, the world around him to see, hear, smell. It wouldn't be so bad. The negative feelings of people, he could still feel them, unpleasant as they were, wouldn't hold him back. Their fear, hate, guilt, anger, he could deal with it somehow. Maybe he could run somewhere far away where he wouldn't be bothered, or maybe he could get rid of them, get rid of the people, push them out or crush and kill them so he'd stop feeling their malice and despair. Stop. Where had that thought come from? That wasn't him. He didn't want to hurt anyone, that wasn't him. He wasn't the monster, he wasn't the Nine Tails, he wasn't a threat, a danger. And he never would be. He hoped. Why did he think those things? Was it the fox? Was the Nine Tails somehow affecting his thoughts? Or was he just starting to letting his isolation get to him? Whatever it was, he couldn't just stay as he was. Not forever. Something would give. He'd screw up and something would happen, something bad, though he couldn't say what. He still held out hope, though. Jiraiya was the best seal master in the Land of Fire, probably the best in the world. And he was here, in Konoha, working furiously to help him. So he would be back to normal sometime. Mostly. He'd see real people again, eat real food again, live in his own apartment, maybe make friends, become a real shinobi, instead of just brute force incarnate with a forehead protector that nobody could even see. "Hey Naruto," his sensei yelled, immediately pulling the Jinchuriki's attention away from his own worries. He stopped moving and looked around, excited to be back to his normal body, back to the familiar and safe, if only for a short time. His sensei had come to revert him, probably having followed him across the river in a normal shinobi fashion. He did remember that he had something to ask, though. "Hey, Tenzo-sensei, would it be okay if you could remove your mask? Maybe just when nobody else is around." Hokage's office. The third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, was surprised by the surprising work ethic of his student. Since he'd returned, he hadn't heard even one report of any perverts peeping on hot springs, which was usually standard when the author of the Icha Icha series was in town. Now he was already in the Hokage office, showing new seals drawn up whole cloth to solve a completely unique Jinchuriki seal problem. That said, the Hokage did note the bags under the Sanin's eyes. "Jiraiya, exactly how much have you slept these past days?" he wondered silently. Jiraiya began to speak, giving an answer to the Jinchuriki seal problem rather than the question of his sleep schedule. "I've got two major things to help get Naruto out of this. First," he began, pulling out a scroll bearing a complex array of seals, "this is the simple one." "That's the simple one," the Hokage repeated in his head. "This is basically a basic safety measure on the seal. Right now, when he transforms, it's really sudden, so he's a danger to people around whenever he's set off." He started pointing to some parts of the seal. "These will go around the existing seal, just attaching to the outflow from them. Instead of the fox's chakra just flowing directly from beast to brat through the seal, they'll flow through this, which resists chakra flow. But not like standard chakra suppression seals. I saw your note on using those, by the way," he added with a grin. Hiruzen grinned back at that. He'd never heard of a chakra suppression seal evaporating off a person's body like that before, but it was probably expecting too much of the poor seal to try and contain a tailed beast. "No, these just kind of slow it down. Now, instead of just suddenly puffing up into the giant fuzzball, he'll hiss like a crappy exploding tag for about 10 seconds, then puff up into the giant fuzzball." That was real progress. He could certainly be trained to use that time to get out of the way. From the reports and his experience, most of the fox's body appeared behind the boy, so he could orient his back away from anything he had to keep safe and jump far enough away that the fox's face didn't touch anything as it formed or even start working to counteract it. "Basically, see these curly patterns here?" he asked, indicating the part of the array. "That's just extra chakra paths in the seal flowing around while returning back to where they'd originally leave. It's basically delaying it, sort of like a drink in a curly straw." His perverted but certainly skilled student began pulling out a larger scroll. As he opened it, the Hokage saw the absurdly complex seal drawn out along it. Honestly, on both of these, most of the work was making them as compatible with the existing seal as possible, or as innocuous to other seals as possible, the seal master explained. "This seal is some of my best work, I think. The intent of this is to help hold back the chakra, doing what Minato's seal was originally doing to help replace the faded part and expanding on it to deal with the surplus of demonic chakra compared to the expectations of the original design, he began. I couldn't just make more of Minato's because that's self-contained and anything running on the exact principles would interfere. He continued for quite a bit, explaining exact compatibility issues, problems that he solved during the design, why he needed to use 10 feet of scroll to hold a seal, and how that 10-foot seal was going to be placed on a slightly short child, it compacts. Hide the details. When he was talking about the complexities of sealing, Jiraiya was almost like a different person. Now, the most important bit in practical terms is how the seal gets powered, the seal master continued. Something like this would normally just use the boy's own chakra, but is polluted, basically, by the demonic chakra. Even more so now, as you can see by his eyes. But, we still need human chakra. Nature chakra might be nice to use sometime, but we'd need some very specific training to do that safely. Until then, the best we can do is these. Here, he indicated a very unusual section of the array. These are the real key here. These draw chakra from other people. Imperceptibly so and from a little bit of range, mostly to get a small amount to form a pattern, which his own chakra can be molded by the same seal to better match. Then, the seal has power, can hold a lot more tailed beast, and hold it better. Some foreign human chakra should keep him going for about a week before it needs to be refreshed, otherwise the seal will stop working, in which case it'll just be like he was without it. The hissing delay seal will work without this one. Now the kicker. It'll work better if he gets a bit of variety. Tenzo's a good kid, but if Naruto's just sticking with him, it won't be as effective as if he gets him human interaction with the general population, he explained finally. Hiruzen saw a circular problem here. Unfortunately, until it works well, having him interact with the general population is a safety hazard. Well, ramp up his human interaction. Start with some visitors. He was close to a few people, right? Have some of them come and visit, maybe. You were also planning on putting him on a team, right? Have him start doing some exercises or simple missions with the team, maybe. Hiruzen agreed. This sounds all well designed and effective. Anything else I should know about them? Jiraiya sighed before continuing to explain. Yeah, they wouldn't be perfect. Minato sacrificed his soul to make the existing seal, and it wasn't enough. The tailed beast forms triggered by some kind of emotional change, up or down. Even when the new seal's at full power, anything really strong will probably still get through and, of course, a fully willing transformation would still occur. The man stopped to breath a moment, then continued. Also, it's not fully combat hard. Hits can disrupt the perfect function of the seal, so expect transformations in combat, though I don't expect him to be in too much direct combat for too long. Finally, he'll still have to practice that demonic chakra shaping and control from before to work with his seal. Very well, the old Hokage said in acceptance. One more question. Is there any kind of test you've done on these? I've tested parts to make sure they do what they should, but I haven't found any other Jinchuriki suffering from spontaneous tailed beast transformations to practice it on. Fair enough, the Hokage supposed. Well, are you ready to apply these wonderful seals? Outside Konoha. The blonde Jinchuriki, in human form, was attempting to remain calm by meditating. But, his calm was interrupted when he heard footsteps and not those of his wood-controlling sensei. Opening his eyes he saw the third Hokage and the seal master, Jiraiya-sama. Unable to curb his excitement, he just yelled back. And a moment later he was no longer in human form. But, even that wasn't enough to dampen his spirits. Jiraiya was here, with a solution. He leaned the fox's head down and rested on its chest to listen closely. Hey, brat. I see you're excited to see me, the seal master commented dryly. The indicated brat smiled sheepishly, though to those unfamiliar, it just looked as menacing as any other look from a tailed beast. We can't very well do much like this, though. Tenzo. Called the Hokage. The Anbu approached. But, instead of simply having him undo the fox form now, the Hokage called for them to move further out. We're dealing with seals that cannot be fully tested. If this goes awry, I want us out of sight of Konoha. That was no trouble for the fox-formed boy. The details were explained as they moved. Once they were sufficiently far out, the preparations began. As the Anbu reverted the Jinchuriki's transformation again, the Hokage prepared a seal to keep them in the area. The blonde shinobi was lost in his own thoughts after hearing the details. He was going to be normal, or at least a lot closer than he'd been lately. He'd get to talk to friends, and soon. And he wouldn't have to worry about those thoughts again. Soon enough, the reversion was done, and the completely human boy, his gray clothing slightly melted, was prepared for the sealing. The Anbu grew a very plain-looking room with no visible outside views. The Jinchuriki was laying on his back in the center, sans shirt, as the seal master, or at least the seal master's clone carrying the real seal master's ink and brush, began to work. He had to just stay calm. Think about nothing. Meditate. Nothing. Nothing at all. Nothing as minutes passed. Nothing as an hour passed. How much time had actually passed? Think of nothing. Time is nothing. He counted. He could count without any excitement. He could count for this. This was when it counted to be able to count. To think of the numbers. Each one just a little higher. The feel of the brush on him was not important. The numbers were. The feel of chakra flowing around him wasn't important. The numbers were. Ignore, ignore, ignore. Count higher. From 788 to 789. He could only guess how much time had passed in the quiet room with no outside light. Done. Yelled the clone seal master suddenly, to the surprise of the laying Jinchuriki. But the surprise didn't trigger anything. He began to stand back up and took an offered shirt from Tenzo-sensei wasn't wearing a mask. He had a plain, clean-shaven face with wide eyes and wore a forehead protector that extended down the sides of his face. The boy committed the face to memory. With tears in his eyes, he turned to Jiraiya, who wore a smile. Thank you. He said. It was all he knew to say, all he could say. No problem, brat. You're not a bad kid, the wonderful man responded jovially. I should tell you, though, your eyes are still weird looking. I guess that's a part of you now. That was okay, he could deal with looking a little unusual. No more problems, he'd have to practice, still, but it was possible before, and it would be possible now. He'd talk to Iruka-sensei, Tuchi-NAM, and some of his old classmates. Eventually, he'd meet his team and get to start doing missions as a real ninja. No more worries, like the last few days had just been a bad dream. The Hokage entered the room, accompanied by the real Jiraiya, the former with a simple grin, the latter with a wide smile. Nothing to worry about at all. Not even. Hiding things didn't work before. Hiding things wouldn't work now. Old man, I've got to tell you something. Something it earlier today, when I was transformed, he began. He explained what he'd been thinking then, through the point when he suddenly seemed to consider killing people for no reason besides their negative feelings. The old man furrowed his brows in thought. I'm not sure what to make of this. Naruto-kun, we are only starting to understand this, sensing you've developed. You sense negative thoughts in some way, stronger in the Nine Tails form, but I don't know why that could provoke such a reaction, he said. But, thank you for telling me this, he said finally with a faint smile. Oh, one more thing. Said Jiraiya, walking up to him. Give me your arm. The blonde's left arm extended out to the man. The seal master took a small vial from his clothing and made a small cut on the arm, collecting a few drops of blood. The wound stopped bleeding at that point, and a few seconds later, the arm looked like it hadn't been touched. I may have a use for this later, for purposes of sealing, he vaguely explained, sealing the covered vial in a scroll. The boy felt a very slight trivial guilt from the man at this, so there was more to it than that, but nothing major. This man had just done more for him than any single person before, as far as he knew. The four shinobi began heading back to Konoha now, the Anbu causing the temporary structure to fade back into the earth as they left. While he was certainly still nervous about people who would still fear him and about some of his own thoughts, he held real optimism for the future, something he hadn't had nearly enough of since that night. North of Konoha. Iruka-sensei? Asked a blonde, seeing the scarred chunin for the first time since that night. Hello, Naruto-kun, he said simply. I'm sorry it took so long to visit you. Iruka-sensei. He repeated. So, you're a ninja now? Yeah, I even have the forehead protector, the blonde responded, tapping the accessory proudly. I'm proud of you, he continued. And not just for graduating. I've heard what's going on, it's been tough. The blonde looked contemplative. How are you doing? The boy asked after a moment. Me? I'm fine. Still not up to 100%, but I'll get back to teaching in time. The boy hesitated. Then, he looked at his sensei right in the eyes and said. You're lying. Iruka sighed and considered what to say. Really, Naruto, don't worry about me. You're lying. Yaoi were not fine, the blonde reiterated. You're still hurt. I saw when you walked in. It's not how you normally walk. Please, Naruto, it's not that bad, he continued. You're still my favorite student and one of my best friends. Why? The boy asked. You nearly died because of me. Mizuki died because of me. Mizuki was a traitor. He was once my friend, but no more, the chunin explained. That he died is just a consequence of his own actions. Before he could continue, he was interrupted. He was? I mean, they said that, Beauty can't really remember what happened there, the boy said, no longer able to make eye contact. I thought maybe were they just trying to make me feel better. I was there, Naruto. Mizuki was a liar and a traitor to Konoha who tried to kill both of us, he said with finality. You can recognize when I lie, right? You know I'm not lying now. You should have known when they told you, too. The boy sighed. You're right. I'm just not sure what to say to think about all this. Despite being a ninja and a powerful and dangerous Jinchuriki, he didn't look very imposing now. You almost died and now you're still hurt because I was stupid about Mizuki and I don't even remember how it happened, just that I keep turning into a monster now and I could hurt you again or someone else. The boy's voice began to get hoarse. I don't know what really happened to you, just that I couldn't see you for so long. And now that I get to see you again. He paused, not sure how to continue. You're afraid of me. I can feel you're afraid of me. Iruka didn't know what he could say to that. I know how the new seal's supposed to work. I'm supposed to be near people and you're just a person who's come here to help with it, he accused. Naruto. Would you ever not be afraid of me? Would you ever be healthy again, for real? The blonde asked. The chunin had to think a time but decided to be direct with his student. No, he admitted. I can't say I'll ever be without fear of you again and I won't be going back to active duty again. The boy's expression fell. Mizuki's shuriken was hard on my spine. Well, that might have been fixable, I was then too close when you suddenly transformed and the chakra poisoning aggravated my condition. The boy tensed and the chunin saw tears forming in his eyes. But, I do not regret what I did. The look changed, surprise and confusion now evident. If I knew then what I knew now, I would still jump in front of that attack, Naruto, the chunin continued. You feel negative emotions, I've heard this. The blonde nodded slightly. That's it, you know. The blonde was still not sure what to think of Iruka's words. You feel the worst of people, their worst thoughts, their saddest reactions. But there's more to them, to me, than our negative emotions. You, I, and everyone else has positive emotions, too. Just because you don't feel them doesn't mean they aren't there, don't get stuck on the negative you feel. I am scared, certainly, it'd be stupid not to be at least wary around someone with that much power and such limited control possible, and I still had memories of the Nine Tails attack from years ago. And I don't like being pulled off active duty permanently. But despite all of that, I came here, of my own free will, and not just for you or your seal's stability. I came here for me, because you mean a lot to me, and I wanted to see you. You can check that. The blonde just stared for a time. Eventually, though, he went up to his sensei and embraced him. Team 7's training ground. A certain black-haired boy been assigned a short-handed team, promised that a third member would be added when he or she was ready. He'd managed to somehow get through his Cyclops of a sensei's bell test with just the help of a useless fangirl with a hair color that he swore couldn't be natural. He'd only won by offering her food as she was tied up uselessly to a post before what was supposed to be their final chance. Since then, his team had been assigned various chores called missions. He was stagnating. What was the point of all this? Where was his damn third teammate? He needed to do real missions, get real experience. So he could finally kill him and move on with life without constantly having to watch his back. And then, finally, after weeks of useless D-rank missions, his sensei had informed him and his pink-haired teammate that their third member would be joining them soon. Oh, and by the way, your teammate is that Jinchuriki you've heard so much about, his sensei had said, with the same tone he used for his increasingly unlikely excuses for his own tardiness. It might have been comical, if not for the actual implications of the statement. He hadn't had any family to come to him the night the nine-tailed demon fox reappeared in Konoha. He had just sat upright on his bed, pressed in by the terrifying presence, until an Anbu agent had picked up him and taken him to a shelter, briefly mentioning the nine tails. But he hadn't so focused on that. He wished he could say he had never felt anything like it before. To an extent, he hadn't felt anything exactly the same. But he'd felt similar once. That night. When he killed Sasuke's family. In a few days, it was like Konoha was back to normal. Like it hadn't nearly been wiped out. And now he or she was going to be on Sasuke's team. Was he terrified to be near it? No, he was in Uchiha, he'd get over it and any other obstacle. Was he excited? More like apprehensive, he supposed. Did he see an opportunity? Maybe he did. Could he call it his own revenge if he got it indirectly? Did it need to be his own revenge? He wasn't truly sure. Putting his musings aside, as he was arriving at the training ground at the specified time, he had considered that maybe introducing a new teammate would be sufficient reason for his sensei to arrive on time, but clearly it was not the case. His brightly haired teammate, the only one at present, perhaps the demon container would have some kind of outlandish hair color as well, greeted him with something he completely ignored and they soon sank into a silence, in his case, stoic silence, in her case, awkward silence. Training ground 7. A familiar quiet training ground and her future boyfriend did nothing to settle Sakura Haruno's nerves. Her standard greeting to Sasuke-kun had been horribly stuttered and she honestly reminded herself of Hinata. The boy had coolly ignored her, so he certainly didn't seem to mind her nervous disposition. They were supposed to be meeting the Jinchuriki, the container of the giant monster that had once laid waste to large sections of the city, slaughtered uncountable shinobi and citizens, and that could still occasionally be felt somewhere beyond the walls, and she was not what anyone would mistake for ready for it. Sure, she was aware of the likely reasons, integrating the Kunoichi or shinobi into the ranks as normal member, but really, couldn't they pick some other team? Like, say, any of them? Please. She sighed, unaware of if Sasu-kun would notice her sighing apparently out of nowhere. Soon, she heard footsteps, and not those of her talented quiet teammate, who was still standing still. Kakashi Haddock, Team 7's Jounin sensei, walked into the clearing, surprisingly close to the agreed time, accompanied by someone very familiar. With the exceptions of sharper nails, thicker facial markings, a pair of red, slitted eyes, a surprisingly dull-colored outfit, and as nervous of a disposition as her. Naruto. Both she and Sasu cried out. Mission office. The Hokage sat behind his desk, waiting to hand out a very important mission to a very specific team. Not that the task assigned by the mission itself was particularly special, just another D-rank task, in particular some work on a minor farm at the edge of town. Weeding a small field, as he recalled from the mission request. No, it was supposed to be a test, or possibly a demonstration, of a certain rookie ninja. One blonde-haired gray-clad ninja had been working tirelessly to deal with his problem for a few weeks now, since his own pride had undone all the progress he'd made. He couldn't control it completely by himself now, though perhaps he never really could. His student's examination had at least turned up some information, though. The seal was originally designed to hold only about half of the Nine Tails chakra, probably either the yin or yang half, since that was probably the easiest way to split it in half rapidly. However, for whatever reason, all of the fox's chakra, or very nearly all, at least, had been sealed. The seal was therefore overloaded, causing the raw chakra containment to be poor. What Jiraiya still could not explain, though, was what the seal did that prevented the Nine Tails will from bleeding through. Somehow, though, the seal clearly did that to a level no Jinchuriki seal before had been able, allowing the boy full use of the demonic chakra with relatively little risk. While he had faith in his successor's work, though, the town as a whole only knew that the monster that had destroyed their homes and murdered their loved ones was only mostly contained a recognizable blonde shinobi. They needed proof. So, he had a mission inside of town to give them proof. Precautions were taken, to be sure. He had set up a route for Team 7 from the main gate to their training ground, to the office, and to the destination that consisted primarily of wider roads, and he'd had some Anbu on hand to discreetly keep them fairly empty. The mission itself, as well, was mostly in a wide, empty field. But even so, he was certain that this simple D-rank mission would give sufficient proof of their Jinchuriki's stability in emotion and form. Finally, Team 7 arrived at the mission office. An uncertain-looking boy with black hair, a nervous girl with pink hair who was rarely sneaking dreamy looks at the black-haired boy and, more frequently, sneaking unsettled looks at her other teammate, and the Jinchuriki himself, who was sneaking nervous looks at everything. And, of course, their mostly masked captain, in person and unjarringly on time. Team 7, here to request a mission, Hokage-sama, Kakashi stated, in a manner that certainly appeared professional. Very well. I have a specific mission for your team today, he said. He grinned inwardly as he suddenly had the young Uchiha's attention. He continued the instructions with utmost outer seriousness, handing over a mission briefing file. You're going to weed the field belonging to the Gyatani family on the southeastern side of the village. And now he had the young Uchiha's displeasure as well. Another D rank? He asked quietly but incredulously. Even now, with our entire team? The old man looked directly at the boy. This is, in fact, a very important mission. It may seem simple, but it is of importance to the village, and furthermore, it is very important that Team 7 in particular is the one to undertake it. The young man staggered slightly under the god of shinobi's glare. Now, off you go. I expect a full report afterwards, he finished. Yes, Hokage-sama. The four varied voices of Team 7 stated as they turned to leave, with the silver-haired Jounin leading the way. And, unknown to at least two of them, accompanied by a cat mask Anbu agent. The mission assigned, the Hokage leaned back. I just sent the single most powerful and dangerous shinobi in the world off to weed a garden, he thought, allowing himself an amused grin. He truly was the god of shinobi. Gyatani farm. Not to say that Sakura was no longer nervous about the Jinchuriki, but so far, nothing had happened in particular. It was a fairly large field, and the work was relatively mindless, if physically taxing after a while. She had thought on what the Hokage had said. Why her team in particular for this mission? Of course, she thought morosely. The Jinchuriki. It was a simple mission, in town, to get people used to the boy. And he would take some getting used to, she could attest to that, though he wasn't so bad thus far, really. Then there was the matter of his curious introduction to the time. Back when they'd first met as a team, minus the blonde demon container, they'd each had to come up with likes, dislikes, hobbies, and a dream. While hers had generally revolved around her Sasu-kun, save for dislikes, which were reserved for Ino Pig, and since then, she'd actually talked with her once friend a bit more, she seemed interested in being a friend once more, he had stated that he dreamed often at being feared. Not exactly what she pictured from a mighty demon-wielding shinobi that turned into a giant monster. Butham. Sasu-kun had moved to the far end of the field from her, but she wanted to finish her current section before she wandered close to him again. Her next pass would take her fairly close to her new teammate, though. Maybe she should say something. Hey, she said lamely, as her work brought her past where the Jinchuriki was reaching for a stubborn-looking weed, though he managed to uproot it with no difficulty before looking up at her. Hey, he responded, equally lamely. She wasn't sure how to word her question so she didn't sound rude. So I was wondering why you aren't an insane monster or how it is, being a monster well, a Jinchuriki. Well, it wasn't an outright accusation of evil or anything, though he did still seem distraught. He seemed to take some time to decide how to respond. I guess it's frustrating, he said. She was a bit confused by that response. You're my teammate and will be for a while, so I should tell you. He seemed to be gathering himself. Tell me what? You've seen how I transform, he started. After a moment, he added, or, I guess you've felt it. She nodded, remembering that night and the ensuing days when she assumed he'd been practicing using the demonic power. I don't like to. I've never done so on purpose. Wait, what? But, you've used it a lot. Tu thought you were practicing with it, practicing how to use it in battle, she said, taken by surprising by the most recent revelation. The blonde boy shook his head. Maybe slightly, but for the most part, no. I've been training with it, but not to try and use it, he clarified. I guess, you could say I've been practicing to try and not use it. If I have to use it, I've mostly practiced not being too clumsy. She looked at him with confusion. I said before, I've never transformed into it on purpose. It's been caused by things I couldn't control then, that I've only recently gotten control of. This wasn't what she expected. The Jinchuriki she'd been worried about, the ninja with demon powers capable of destroying a village, was actively avoiding using them. Was transforming unwillingly. She wasn't sure how much of it she believed, but maybe he was just another person, dealing with something larger than himself. Like she was, she supposed. Thanks, he said, finally, as he continued his bit of gardening. It was probably about time for her to get moving, too. They had this mission to do, though she wondered if that short conversation about a dozen sentences may have been more important. Eventually, she finished her section and she moved off to another part of the field, away from her blonde teammate and towards Sasu-kun. A bit later, though, she saw someone else coming. Not Sasu-kun, at work in the field near her, or even Kakashi-sensei, though. It wasn't even Jyotanai-san, who was waiting, most certainly not cowering, in his home beyond the edge of the field. It was a villager, she supposed, with dark brown hair, an unreadable expression on his face, and on closer inspection, a missing left arm. He was heading over to her newest demand which raised a red flag in her head. She started approaching, but he had begun to speak already. So after everything, you think you can come back here? He started, expression still flat. Just walk back into town like nothing's happened. Her teammate remained quiet in the face of the villager's rhetorical questions. I don't care what the Hokage thinks. You're a danger to all of us, the villager continued, his expression's neutrality fading. Sakura arrived at the scene and spoke up. Sir, I'm not so sure he is, she began quietly. I don't care what you think, either, he said, turning his developing glare to her now. He's a monster, or close enough to one. As just another ninja, like me, she decided after a moment. He's supposed to protect the village, and he seems inclined to do just that, Sakura continued, ignoring what the man was saying. Like hell. You believe that? That he's just another ninja? Then why's he been kept out of the village so long, The man continued, no longer looking very much like the unassuming villager that had first arrived. Run home, little Genin. I thank you for your service to the village, but you shouldn't be here right now. What's the big problem? She asked irately. What's the big problem? He responded derisively. The big problem is a building-sized demon with 9 tails that crushed my home and killed most of my family 13 years ago. The venom in his voice was staggering, and Sakura felt pushed back by his words. This couldn't be a civilian she was talking to. I know that you're here to prove that you can hold that thing back, he began again, turning back to her blonde teammate, whose head had tilted forward, making his expression unknowable. Strangely, he hadn't said a word in his own defense this entire time. I'm here because I know you can't. You get agitated and it shows up, like it did a few weeks back, like it's been doing since then. The Hokage thinks he's so powerful, he can just put a person-shaped leash on a tailed beast, but that doesn't fucking work. His voice was quite loud now. Her teammate was starting to look tense. Was this a bad sign? Wait, the villager seemed to know things. The fox, shows up when he gets agitated. This man was trying to get him to turn into the fox here, and now that's why he said she should leave. You're going to get us killed. She shrieked at him, backing away slightly. Leave while you still can. If my death is all it takes to keep him out of the village forever, then that's a fair deal to me. He yelled back, a look of determination on his face. She should leave. Now. Right now. She really should. I'm not leaving, she said, surprising herself. I have friends here, he said, more quietly now, as if to explain himself to her. I had friends in the Third War that died to a Jinchuriki that went berserk. He'd seemed perfectly normal, right up until it happened. Hell, he even killed several of his own allies. His voice was growing again but fell for the next sentence. It's not going to happen to the friends I have now. His voice was quiet, but she could hear the emotion behind it. She moved to try and pull him away, but her teammate raised his arm to stop her. Now he turned back to her teammate to try again to force a response. It's time, monster. You're a goddamn lit explosive tag, you can't keep pretending to be normal. It's just a matter of time before you kill someone you shouldn't, accident or no. He paused a moment, expecting a reaction, but getting no more, he continued. Well, guess what? It won't be my village you put in danger anymore. Faster than Sakura could react, the man drew out a kunai with his right arm and lunged toward her teammate. But he didn't hit anything. The young genin had dodged to the side and caught his only arm. But the man was not deterred, very quickly kicking him. Her teammate took that hit, unable to dodge it as well while holding back the blade, and it knocked the boy down, resulting in the man's arm being freed. But her teammate again motioned for her to stay back. Then she heard it. A hissing sound. The one Kakashi-sensei had briefed the team on. He was prone, now, so what direction the fox body could form in was not known. She began to back away, and then. The sound stopped a few moments after it had begun, as her teammate tensed. Finally, for the first time in this confrontation, he spoke. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, his voice showing the regret he stated, but I'm not leaving. I'm stronger than you think, I won't be gotten the better of by some damn fox demon. I hope you won't always be so afraid of me. Is that what you think? The man bit back angrily in disbelief, stepping toward the prone genin, not noticing someone approaching him from behind, while he tried to draw back his arm. You think you can face down the Nine Tails? He hadn't noticed the Anbu behind him yet. You think you have a stronger will than a centuries-old demon of destruction? The Anbu had taken his arm and had a hold of him. He had to be aware now, but he was still ranting at Sakura's teammate. You think you won't be like other Jinchuriki, you think you will never become a comrade killer. Now he was being carried away, finally out of earshot. Sakura released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was over. Thanks again, her new teammate said, preparing to right himself. Only now did she get a good look at his face. He had tears in his strange eyes, but a faint smile on his face. She wasn't sure how close she would become to the boy, but he certainly didn't seem as dangerous as Jinchuriki had been made out to be. She offered a hand. Mission office. Kakashi had an interesting report for the Hokage. They'd successfully completed the D-rank mission to weed the Gyatdanai family field. His new teammate had shown impressive aptitude at pulling out the stubborn plants. Also, there was a curious incident in which one former ninja, later identified as Kotaro Yakato, had approached and begun talking with his blonde student, having somehow gotten through the subtle Anbu blockade around the area. The conversation eventually evolved into a physical altercation before the man was arrested. He'd been prepared to intervene if necessary, but noticed his own foot caught on a root, one that he was certain hadn't been there when he had first arrived. Later, it turned out that several others had also gotten through and were watching the altercation. News would likely spread about it through town. While D-rank missions weren't exactly high-secrecy assignments, it was generally accepted that, at least as practice, the details of even D-rank missions should remain at least somewhat secret. This one was being discussed everywhere. He only said one thing, as he personally turned in the report to the Hokage. You knew that would happen, didn't you? The only answer he got from the god of shinobi was a faint grin. Hokage's office. The third Hokage was reviewing a mission request with suspicion. The front desk had mentioned that the man who brought it in seemed nervous, though the man was also certainly quite drunk. The description had seemed fairly ordinary. A civil engineer, or maybe an architect, avoiding using the man's self-given title of super bridge builder, wanted to be escorted to his home country of the Land of Waves, presumably to protect him against bandits on the way. Several things tipped him off that there may be more to it. First, the nervousness. Second, why was the man even here if he was supposed to be off building a bridge in the country he was getting escorted back to? Third, the geopolitical implications. not as evident at first, but when the Hokage delved deeper, he saw that all shipping to and from the Land of Waves was handled by the Gato Company. This bridge would cut off that company, so would be something of a setback for them. He was also aware that the company was shady at best, while murderous and criminal at worst. The Hokage suspected, as well as suspected that the architect suspected, that the Gato Company had put out a hit on him. But rather than just turning it down, he saw an opportunity. The Land of Waves would certainly be indebted to the Konoha if they were to help with the bridge. Maybe he should call for some favorable trade agreements with Konoha and the Land of Fire as a whole, as the price for a higher-ranked mission. On the other hand, as a C rank, it was applicable to genin teams, and he had a genin team that was due for a higher-ranked mission. It also happened that this particular genin team was packed for bear, so to speak. This genin team also had specific need to get through some troubling emotional issues that were more likely to come up on a mission with probably violent opposition. Furthermore, sending a genin team would set the man's nerves on edge, a bit of payback for lying about mission parameters. So, he'd send this particular C-rank mission to one Kakashi Haddock. He'd take his team to pick up the man. Eventually. Again, a bit of payback for lying about mission parameters. Team 7 meeting place. So, he's always like this? Questioned a blonde shinobi. Yeah, pretty much, responded a pink-haired Kunoichi, who looked up from sneaking glances at the quiet third member of Team 7. They were referring, of course, to their cycloptic sensei, who was now 2 hours late. It's something about elite jounin, I think. They're tough enough that they can get away with quite a bit of nonsense without getting called on it. She thought a moment. Without getting called on it by someone that can do something about it, anyway. The blonde wondered if, by that logic, he had carte blanche to sleep in as long as he wanted. Plans for extra sleep were interrupted by an approaching jounin sensei. Kakashi, specifically. Does Tenzo sensei count as a jounin sensei? He's my sensei, and he's a jounin, he mused. Yo, said the tardy man simply. You're late, yelled the Kunoichi. You're late, said the blonde shinobi with some minor annoyance. HN, accused the black-haired shinobi. Sorry, I was distracted by a rock, he explained matter-of-factly, his eye curved to imply a sheepish smile. Liar, yelled Sakura. No, it's the truth for a change, even if it sounds dumb, the jounin explained. You've just admitted that the rest of the time your excuses are just BS, Sakura noted with irritation. Their sensei ignored it and just continued. I've got a surprise for you all today, he said cheerfully. We're going to pick up a C-rank mission. Something above weeding a field, then, though that last mission was surprisingly intense for a D rank. But from the looks of his teammates, it was almost as if he'd announced their field promotions to chunin. It's about time, intoned Sasuke, the first time the blonde had heard him speak real words since he'd arrived this morning. Mission office. Their client wasn't a terribly impressive man. A drunk old man with a straw hat and not very much respect for the team that was going to be escorting him. That short blonde kid with the weird eyes, he even a ninja. He looks pretty wimpy. The short blonde kid with the weird eyes was sure the man at the mission desk was trying hard not to laugh at the irony. And so the 4 members of Team 7 set off from the gate and headed south, toward the coast and the country beyond it, along with Tazuna, the super bridge builder, either a super builder of bridges or a builder of super bridges, the Jinchuriki was uncertain. Also, at a distance where most of their entourage would not notice, they were followed by an Anbu with a cat-like mask, by the Hokage's suggestion. The blonde certainly didn't object, like hell was he going to get transformed early on and spend the rest of the multi-day mission as a tailed beast. On the road. Beyond Konoha, in a southerly direction for once, the Jinchuriki took in the sights, smells, and sounds of the unfamiliar territory, the latter 2 senses having been brought more to his thoughts since the recent events. Different animals with different scents and different sounds, he almost might not have minded being in the fox's form right now, though he'd prefer if he could somehow have the ability of the fox's powerful nose and large and admittedly fairly ridiculous ears. To think of it, he'd seen actual ordinary foxes before, and from the reflections of the 9 tails form he'd seen on still water, the ear sizes were not really similar. Nor was much of the body shape similar above the torso. It was more like a 9-tailed fox-rabbit person thing, though he supposed that was way too much to say. Not that had stopped them from calling another tailed beast a 5-tailed dolphin-nosed horse. His musings of the different countrysides they were traveling through was put on hold by something peculiar. He faintly felt what seemed to be bloodlust from nearby. All he could find was a few rocks strewn about, a puddle, and the trees and lesser flora around the road, but he wasn't about to discount it yet. In his time as a ninja, he had certainly learned that enemies could be hidden. Hey, Kakashi-sensei, he began, but the man shushed him. Ignore it for now, there's something I want to see, he replied. If the sense was suspicious, Kakashi's response was a red flag. The man must have noticed something specific that the boy hadn't. But even so, the feeling wasn't fading. Are you sure? "Yes," replied his new sensei before he could finish. A short time later, he felt it coming from behind. Quickly. Spike chains suddenly wrapped around Kakashi, wielded by two ninja who had emerged from behind, one in a darker caped uniform and one in a grey uniform about the same shade as the boy's own. And then they pulled on their chains. Where Kakashi once stood, there seemed nothing left but bloody bits. All that was left of the man. One of the few men that hadn't feared the Jinchuriki and who he had come to respect. He lost all sense. When he heard the hissing, he wasn't surprised. He didn't try to stop it. He just jumped back to the side, out of the team's formation, vaguely noting their shocked expressions, as well as that of their ward. Here he routed the fox's chakra around the delaying seal. Once he was out of the way, the murderers would die. Now. The demonic chakra released from the seal and enveloped him, developing in moments into the gigantic nine-tailed demon fox. The formerly confident look's eyes of the two attackers was now replaced with terror and panic. The darker clothed one was slightly closer and just barely managed to dodge as the fully transformed Jinchuriki swatted a clawed hand at him, but the force of the movement still launched him back against a tree with a loud crack. Because he didn't try to be proactive. Because he didn't act when he thought there was danger. Knew there was danger. Kakashi was now dead because he hadn't acted. The other had been sprinting and jumping away but turned back at his brother's plight. "Gozu," he yelled, horror evident in his voice, the panic of the sudden appearance of the tailed beast momentarily forgotten. That moment's compassion for his sibling resulted in his death as the Jinchuriki lunged and planted a claw down through his chest, through his heart, and through the ground below. Brigaz the murderer gurgled, blood spilling from his mouth and his open wound. The transformed boy watched him passively, but then he seemed to see someone else. Naruto. In place of the dark-haired man with a mist forehead protector and the breathing mask, he saw a silver-haired man with a leaf emblem on his protector, pleading for help from Iruka. He hadn't remembered the details of what had first happened when he transformed or the events immediately leading up to it very clearly, but he had taken it badly when he had been told. Now, though, he knew. At that time, he had willingly used the power of the nine tails to slay a person in anger. Naruto. Now, he had done so again. He just kind of looked at the man he had just killed. The boy didn't think it had been long, but the corpse was now hardly recognizable. Just decaying bits of flesh barely clinging to the bones. Like Mizuki had been reduced to before the Hokage had shown up. He swore he heard a faint familiar crying coming from somewhere. Naruto Uzumaki. He tore the fox's gaze away from the melting remains on the left paw and saw Kakashi. Alive and unharmed. Behind him, Sakura lay in a fetal position, Sasuke had fallen shakily on his knees, a kunai in hand and his eyes strangely red, and Tazuna was outright unconscious, laying prone on the ground. He was too lost in the sight to notice that of the terrified feelings he sensed in the countryside, one was running away far too fast to be a civilian. On the road. What happened? The Anbu agent had seen and felt the nine tails, with all of its vile killing intent brought to bear. Kakashi-senpai was with him. Nothing should have happened. Why did he transform? He thought in a panic. He arrived to find the killing intent fading and the chakra presence receding. The elder Jounin was looking up at the fully transformed Jinchuriki with a wide, serious eye. The client was knocked out. The other two genin were on the verge of nervous breakdowns. A short distance away, he saw what appeared to be a ninja from Kurigakure, broken on the ground. That man would never move unassisted again, the Anbu recognized. Beneath the Jinchuriki's left paw, Wasa. Chakra poisoning to the point that someone begins to melt was not something a person willingly looked at for long. Naruto, what happened here? Did they attack you? He demanded, indicating the paralyzed man and Theramanes. They came from behind and Kakashi-sensei, he the Jinchuriki started, but he didn't seem able to finish. Kakashi began to speak, rather sheepishly. Two wanted to know who they were after, so I used a substitution to appear to die to their attack, he explained. The seal was tougher than that. The silver-haired Jounin clearly looked chagrined. Effect his death in front of the Jinchuriki. The one that had been starting to look up to him. The one that had a history of seal stability problems with emotional turmoil. Kakashi, he could barely speak, emotional stability, god damn it. He thought for a moment he might get his point across via fear, but he doubted it'd work well against his senior colleague, especially while he was wearing his mask. Well, nothing to do about it now, the Anbu thought with a sigh. I'll check my other students, the cycloptic Jounin said. The Anbu noted that they were starting to move again. The raven-haired Uchiha was back on his feet, if still quite shaky on them. Also, his eyes looked different. The Sharingan, the Anbu mused. Well, at least something good came of this. The Kunoichi was at least upright, tears flowing from her eyes, as Kakashi offered her a hand up, which she took. The Hokage had probably hoped that their introduction to the reality of their teammates' condition would be the result of a much more mundane transformation, rather than the horrifying episode they'd just encountered. I'm sorry, the Jinchuriki said, looking down at the state of his team, a look of pain at what he'd done apparent to the masked Anbu. Not much else to do at the time, Tenzo began the jutsu to reduce the Jinchuriki back to his normal state. Kakashi would have to deal with the client when he woke up, hopefully without full memory of certain S-rank secrets. His former captain would also get to deal with interrogating the one wrecked would-be assassin and cleaning up the other. Lastly, that man could deal with all the Konoha patrols that were almost certainly headed this way to figure out what the hell that was. Land of Waves. A short shipping magnate was in the middle of a meal when he was interrupted by a note brought in by one of his many lackeys. This was from his most dangerous lackey, a leader of a small band of missing nins formerly of Kiri. He read the note, expecting it to be news of the demise of an irritating bridge builder. Instead, he got bad news. Beto. Your target has hired the goddamned Nine Tails from Konoha. You don't pay me nearly enough for this, nor could you. Good luck in your endeavors, you'll need it. Zabuza. Mansion. A certain shipping magnate had a large problem. From the note Zabuza had left him, Gato was thankful for the surprising level of honor the Demon of the Mist had. His entire project in the Land of Waves was about to be wrecked by a legendary demon of hatred and destruction, which Konoha had somehow harnessed, and which that damn architect had somehow managed to hire. He only had a few options now, and he thought through them as quickly as he could, sweating profusely all the while. The first, and his gut reaction said to go with this one, was to just write off this project. His best hired help, A-rank help, had just basically said oh hell no to dealing with this problem. He had no illusions that a bunch of hired goons, samurai, or whatever low-level missing nin he could pick up in the short time before the builder's arrival could do a damn thing to deal with this. He also had no illusions about what would happen if he just tried to keep business running while Tezuna's rent-a-pet was in the country and he had no desire to get eaten. His caveats, though, were still there. If Wave was left to its own devices, his involvement would start to come to light, hindering further operations, and if Konoha was willing to go this far to help the Land of Waves, his operations could very well be in jeopardy in all of the Land of Fire, too. So, just leaving and never thinking about it again, despite the safety he expected, wouldn't be an ideal solution. The second thing he thought of was hostages. If the demon was working for Tezuna, it would probably not be willing to let his family die. If the demon was controlled well enough that way. If he could guarantee the demon would leave after the hostages were taken. If he could keep hostages long enough to be an effective defense. If he could guarantee that there were no others around helping Tezuna. If. Too many ifs for Gato's taste, with his life on the line. No, just taking hostages was out. He wiped the sweat from his brow. No good options yet. Running away was still sounding like a good idea. Wait, maybe it was a good idea. Run away, but come back. The fox was hired protection for the architect, not a permanent resident of Wave. He may just be there to escort him to the country and could be leaving right afterwards. In that case Gato could just come back after he was gone, stop the bridge's construction again, and get through this without a scratch. On the other hand, if the fox stuck around for the bridge's completion and didn't leave until after, he was hosed. Or wait, he wasn't. That super bridge wasn't any more super than any other building, despite Tezuna's claims to the contrary. Gato could just have it destroyed. He'd have to ask Zori about that. The somewhat smarter of his two samurai bodyguards had a little ninja training, though he had ultimately failed to make the cut to be a genin. However, he knew enough to use explosive tags, and Gato could afford lots of explosive tags. Or hey. Don't even bother getting rid of the bridge. Gato could just add a toll booth. Perfect. He could keep collecting all the tax he wanted on Wave's commerce while he had fewer ships committed to the deal. And he didn't even have to pay for it, that old man was making it for him pro bono. Get rid of the geezer after the bridge was built and opened, then he won't be able to call back that old monster. There was a reason Gato Company commanded the most respect and authority of any in the elemental nations, and he was that reason. There were probably still some wrinkles to iron out, but he'd keep working at them. Baraji. He called to his second samurai bodyguard. I've got a plan forming. We're going out to visit some docks and some of our mercs. We've got to be quick with this. Land of Waves. Salt and water. Salt water. And fish. That's what the Land of Waves smelled like, the Jinchuriki determined. He'd been busy identifying what he could hear and smell, trying to take his mind off earlier in the trip. Things he could smell didn't last him very long, though, on a relatively narrow island surrounded by ocean. Team 7 had cautiously and for varying reasons nervously entered the foreign country of Tezuna's residence. The elderly builder seemed to have some amnesia about what had happened on the trip. When he asked Kakashi what had happened, the Jounin had simply said that they had been attacked and Tezuna had passed out in fear during the attack. Well, true enough, I guess, though it leaves out a few details, the Jinchuriki had thought. They met no further resistance since the two missing nins, determined from the hypnosis-based interrogation of the thankfully living Gozu from before had attacked, though the man mentioned that they were working for Zabuza, the demon of the mist, who had one more accomplice, and that their group had been hired as a whole by Gato to kill the bridge builder. Kakashi had had several words with the man after that, but since then, they'd moved on. Kakashi had also had several words, if much kinder ones, with the other two genin in his team. It took a while to get them back on the trail, especially Sakura, and the boy could sense that they had only really served to bury her issues for the sake of the mission, rather than actually resolve them. Once they were back in Konoha, he didn't want to think of that for now. Anyway, despite Gozu's information, neither Zabuza nor any accomplice had shown up on the rest of the trip, and now they'd brought Tazuna home. The man seemed relieved, as did his daughter, Tsunami, who greeted them as they arrived. Tsunami, however, had some interesting news. "Gato's packing up and leaving," she said, not concealing her own disbelief of the news in her voice. "Something about better opportunities elsewhere, I guess, but it looks like everything may be going back to normal." The blonde could feel a certain cyclops staring at him. "Well. That's super," exclaimed Tazuna, smiling widely. "Thank you for your help, Konoha ninjas. I can get back to making my super bridge now." "So it was the bridge that was super." "Hang on," cautioned the silver-haired jounin. "I'm suspicious about this. Why would he leave now?" "He must have heard how good you guys were and decided to take off," said Tazuna, a bit of worry creeping into his voice. "Then, what will stop him from coming back as soon as we leave?" Tazuna didn't have an answer for that, his previous joviality forgotten. "Can you stay until the bridge is done? Once it's built, we should be fine after that," he pleaded. Kakashi considered a moment. "We'll have to think about this." "Team meeting," he decided, motioning for the three genin to leave the building. Once they were at distance from the house, Tenzo made himself known as well, discreetly hiding above in a tree. Kakashi began to speak. "So, Gato must know, somehow. Zabuza or his accomplice may have seen Naruto's little secret. Or felt it," he said, staring at the blonde. Said blonde could have sworn he heard Tenzo subtly add something including whose fault, but it was too quiet to fully hear. Then Kakashi continued. "Zabuza never attacked, and he'd probably have done so if it was just a small group of ninja like this, so at least he's aware of the secret, but he may not be able to link it to a person," he noted. "What we can say, though, is that Gato's scared. He either knows that there was a literal demon coming, or that Tazuna hired ninja, which he may have heard reports of, or he may just know that his missing ninjas all ran off without their paychecks." "That's so, what should we do?" asked Sakura. The Jinchuriki winced whenever she spoke, she'd developed a stutter like Hinata. It didn't help that he could clearly feel her fear the rest of the time and knew it was his own fault. The silver-haired jounin looked at the genin expectantly, Kakashi sensei mode active. The blonde began to speak. "We could just stick around," he said. "Just keep them from returning before the bridge is done." Sakura seemed to have something to say, but was hesitant, looking around, until Kakashi nodded at her. "See, couldn't they just destroy the bridge?" she offered reasonably. After it's built, I mean. "But maybe they won't and we can just," she trailed off a bit, clearly not wanting to disagree with the Jinchuriki too much. "No, Sakura's right," Sasuke began, raising the Kunoichi's spirits visibly. She looked like she needed it, but the Jinchuriki could feel that the Uchiha wasn't exactly okay right now, either, just hiding it better. Even if the bridge is finished, Gato managed to take control of the country once before and he could certainly do it again. The Uchiha stopped to consider for a moment. "We could find Gato and kill him." That was one solution, sure, though the Jinchuriki wasn't very excited for it. Here, Kakashi-sensei decided to chime in. "Just in fee, extrajudicial killing of a semi-significant technically civilian world figure isn't normally part of a C rank and it might be frowned on back home." The blonde noted that he didn't discount it entirely. "So we have to maneuver him?" questioned Sakura. Figure out his plan, catch him in the act, force him to stay out of wave." Kakashi didn't respond, still in sensei mode. Tenzo had vanished at some point, so he didn't have anything to add. "Infiltrate them," Sasuke said suddenly, "with transformations as our disguise. We figure out what they know. What are they planning? If they're just going to show back up after we leave, we stay around, investigate more. If they're planning to just lie low or run away while we're here and then come back afterwards, then the mission's not really a success, even if technically escorted the builder here. If that's the C case, then what? We still need a way to keep him from C coming back," Sakura thought. "We can't stay here forever, they can just wait us out. We then need some long-term solution for when we've left." Sakura's face brightened a moment. A long-term C contract. A contract that Wave would hire missions out from Konoha in exchange for some priority, she realized, showing that the few advanced classes she'd gone to in the academy weren't for naught. If they get a long-term contract to only hire leaf ninjas when they need to commission a, well, mission, they could get passive protection against these kinds of strong-arm tactics, she continued. While his teammate's solution sounded promising, this had gone somewhat above his head and probably Sasuke's, too. Kakashi, however, could continue the discussion and continued with a counter-argument. A contract like that is a two-way street. Sure, Wave could only hire Konoha for missions, and that's something, but honestly, we're already the closest village, and Wave only has so many missions to hire out anyway. What else are we getting that Konoha should give special treatment to Wave? Sakura jumped right on that. The land of waves is historically relatively rich for its size, she remembered from history classes. The poor state it's in, from what we've heard from Tazuna, is just because of Geto. Her stutter had faded out completely as she was deep in her thoughts, and the blonde noted that her more internal fear was also falling somewhat. The trade contract, or maybe just tribute as a protectorate, something like that should be reasonable. For all of this, though, we're going to need to talk to the Wave daimyo. Wave has a daimyo? The Jinchuriki wondered. Yes, Wave had a daimyo. Lots of minor countries have daimyos, Sakura replied to him. She hadn't even hesitated to talk back to him this time. Anyway, talk to Tazuna. This bridge is supposed to be so important, so I bet we can get the daimyo's blessing for some contracts to help in the long run. HN, Sasuke responded with a shrug. Still have to know what they know. If they know about Fox, then. The blonde Jinchuriki asked, worried about the answer. Then we go back to what I thought initially. Kill them, the raven-haired shinobi replied simply. S-rank secrets need to be kept secret. Kakashi-sensei decided to chime in again. Just another fee, the only thing still S-rank is the identity. Otherwise, we'd have a kill on sight for way too many people. The original incident overall wasn't something that could be kept secret. The blonde noted that, again, he didn't discount killing entirely. So if they just know that it's around somewhere, but can't link it to any of us specifically, we don't have to kill, concluded the blonde, a little less apprehensive now. And then we can just do the contract-Y stuff Sakura mentioned. Sakura seemed a little peeved at having her brilliant non-violent solution to the mission reduced to contract-Y stuff, but apparently chose not to say anything. About then, Tenzo showed up again, carrying an unconscious man. He was watching us from afar. He stopped hearing before we said anything too compromising, though he did hear vague mentions of a contract, he began to explain. I interrogated him quickly, disguised as Kakashi-senpai. He doesn't know much, except that Gato's had people watching for Tazuna, and he knows that there are 4 ninjas accompanying him. Well, that's something. At least we know he's watching us now, Kakashi said. Anyway, we've got a super bridge builder to talk to. Land of Waves. Some time after gaining Tazuna's agreement, a raven-haired genin, currently disguised as a raven-haired goon several years his senior, had infiltrated one of the groups of mercenaries, along with his transformation-capable teammate and their sensei, after having spent some time watching them in secret to determine how to do so effectively. It turned out that they were exactly what they appeared to be, so he really didn't have to do much besides the jutsu and a less neutral expression. For infiltration of a hostile force, this was about as simple as it could be, but still, he was surrounded by multiple enemies that would likely attack him if discovered, so he couldn't get distracted. And some distracting things had happened, lately. He had discovered that he'd rather fight Itachi blindfolded than fight his teammate, he had finally gained his Sharingan, his previously assumed useless Kunoichi teammate had shown impressive political acumen, and now his mission had taken this turn. But still, mission, advancement, improvement, to kill Itachi. He overheard several things in the bar they were at, and overhearing was what he was on orders to do. Kakashi would strike up conversations casually, but he was only to speak if one of them spoke to him or to teammates, and even then only in relatively coded terms. So far, from what he'd overheard, he had learned a couple important things. The boss was scared as hell, I mean, I've never seen him sweating like that for. The boss, Gato, knew that he had very serious opposition. Demons aren't supposed to be real. Gato had heard about the 9 tails, or some kind of demon, or maybe it was an oblique reference to Zabuza. It's just what, 4 guys. What's the big deal? Were we all so up in a huff about this? They may not link the ninja directly to the 9 tails. Also, they didn't know about the Jinchuriki's handler, a 5th ninja. Think it's just overreacting. No demons or nothing further proof, they did not link the ninja to the 9 tails. Waves kinda dingy, but I think I'll miss it, said Sasuke-sensei to one of the mercs, waiting at the bar. Don't worry too much. Keep quiet, but I heard from higher up and I don't think we're really done here. That quiet exchange was quite telling. Later, his sensei was in another conversation. But really, ninja. I don't like the idea of having to deal with them. They can, like, breathe fire and stuff, can't they? Ah, you've listened to Zori way too much. Prick thinks he's so special. Ninja's just another kind of merc. The better paid kind. Also of interest. Don't worry your hair off, you're already short on it. Boss always has a plan. Again, of interest, but way too vague. And yes, Kakashi's chosen disguise was bolding pretty badly. Oh, we got a secret weapon or something. Might be that. Not too sure on details, but if we can't get those ninjas to run off with their pay, he's got something to chase them off. Not muscle, though. Damn Missin Nin's I just realized. Our Missin Nin's era Missin somewhat more specific, but still not getting what we wanted. But probably not getting much more from this one. Also, what passed for cleverness among mercs left much to be desired. Kakashi subtly gave a signal, and Team 7 slowly found excuses to break off and leave. They'd have to deal with whatever Gato came up with, but Sasuke was sure it wasn't anything they couldn't handle. Now, they just had to talk to the daimyo. Mansion. Gato was quickly realizing something else could happen. That architect had arrived, escorted by ninja, 4 of them, from what his men had told him. No sign of any demonic foxes of any description. Ninja were people acting in the name of a village and under the banner of a nation. Where had the demon gone? Had Zabuza just lied? Possibly, Gato supposed, but possibly not. Gato was aware that ninja villages sometimes had control of unusual creatures, sometimes through some kind of contract. One of those ninjas may be a summoner for the malevolent fox. Regardless, Konoha ninja worked for Konoha, and Konoha was a part of the Land of Fire, though Gato knew the villages liked to consider themselves equal to the nations they were in. The point was, if the ninjas' presence here could be a problem for the Land of Fire as a whole, there would be serious pressure for them to back off. Now what could he do to get the ninjas out of the country? Maybe there was some merit to one of his previously rejected plans. It was time for him to talk with the daimyo. Land of Waves. Are conspiring to bring a demon known as the Nine-Tailed Demon Fox into the Land of Waves. The Wave Daimyo has ordered all Konoha ninja banished from and barred further entry to the Land of Waves, effective immediately. The declaration from the daimyo's advocate had them speechless. Damn it. For the most part. As they were being escorted to a dock to leave peacefully, with the pay difference to upgrade the mission to B rank, plus the surcharge for the bad intel, Kakashi discussed the exact implications. If we stay around now, there will be repercussions for the Land of Fire, he explained. If they make it clear that they don't want Konoha ninja in, then we could be seen as an occupying force, finished Sakura. Then Konoha is seen as an invader to a foreign land, and accusations of imperialism get thrown at Konoha and the Land of Fire, which distances itself from us and cuts our funding. We'll continue this discussion later, remarked their sensei, as they were brought onto a boat. If nothing else, they didn't have to fear too much at this point. Kicking out the ninja from Konoha was one thing, but killing them after they finished an official mission would bring down a lot of force from the village. Their mission parameters were technically complete, having escorted Tazuna home safely, though the extended protection wasn't included, it could reasonably be argued that the terms were fulfilled due to Gato supposedly leaving, as far as the daimyo was concerned. That said, despite technical success, the whole affair certainly left a bad taste in their mouths. What if Naruto massive chakra in chunin exams, and thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.